the quiet shield of the billionaire at 29. Olivia Hart had learned that power did not make a room quieter. It only taught people to wisp sharper knives. As the young CEO of Aegis Horizon, one of the most powerful private security corporations in the world, she stood at the center of wealth, politics, and inherited expectation, wearing composure like armor tailored in silk. Tonight, at the Global Security Summit in Geneva, she was expected to announce a government contract large enough to shift markets by morning. But beneath the polished lights and polite applause, Olivia felt the old pressure closing around her, the board waiting for one mistake, her relatives measuring her worth against a dead father's legacy, and a world still surprised that a woman could command an empire built on weapons, intelligence, and fear. This was the evening she was meant to prove she belonged instead. It became the first night. Someone tried to show her that the danger had already entered the room. The summit hall glittered like a promise no one fully intended to keep. Glass walls rose 3 stories high, reflecting chandeliers, camera flashes, and the frozen blue lights of Lake Geneva beyond the terrace. Ministers in dark suits moved in clusters. Military officials spoke in low voices near marble columns. Investors laughed carefully, as though each smile had passed through a legal department first. On the central screen, Aegis Horizon's silver emblem hovered above the words "Securing Tomorrow." Olivia stood beneath it, slender and still in a white tailored suit that made her look almost untouchable, almost. Her assistant, Mia Chen, adjusted the final order of Olivia's briefing cards with fingers that moved too quickly. "You've read it 6 times. Olivia said softly, without turning. Mia froze for half a breath, then smiled. 7. I'm being professionally anxious. That makes 1 of us, that makes 2 of us, you're just better dressed." Olivia's lips curved, but the smile didn't reach the heaviness behind her eyes. She had slept 3 hours the night before, 4 the night before that. In the mirror that morning, she had recognized her father's expression on her own face. The calm of someone carrying too much and refusing to set any of it down. Across the hall, her aunt Olivia Hart watched her from beside a cluster of European defense ministers. Eleanor wore black silk, pearls, and the kind of benevolent smile that had made many people underestimate how little mercy she possessed. Beside her stood Victor Hart. Olivia's cousin raised his champagne flute slightly when their eyes met. To anyone else, it would have looked like encouragement. To Olivia, it was a reminder. Family could clap for you with one hand while holding a blade in the other. Mia followed her gaze. "Do you want me to intercept your aunt before she corners you again?" "No, let her come. You say that like someone walking voluntarily into traffic." "I grew up with Eleanor. Traffic has clearer rules." Mia gave a tiny laugh, but it faded when Eleanor began crossing the room. Every step Eleanor took seemed to part people without effort. Old money did not rush, it advanced. "My dear," Eleanor said, kissing the air near Olivia's cheek. "You look radiant, exhausted, but radiant." "Thank you, Aunt Eleanor. You look rested." It was a small cruelty delivered with perfect warmth. Eleanor's smile sharpened. "Big night. Your father would have been proud to see Heartblood still leading Aegis." Olivia did not miss the phrasing. Heartblood. Not Olivia, not her work, not her decisions, not the years she had spent holding the company together after her father's sudden death. "I hope he'd be proud of the direction we're taking," Olivia replied. Victor joined them, all easy charm and expensive confidence. He would be proud if the board remained confident. That's the real battlefield tonight. "The board is confident," Olivia said. Victor's gaze swept over her face, gentle enough to be insulting. "The board is cautious. There's a difference." Mia's shoulders tightened beside her. Olivia simply held Victor's gaze. She had mastered the art of not blinking first in rooms full of men who mistook patience for submission. "The contract will be announced after my keynote," she said. "After that, caution will become profit. And profit Eleanor murmured, is what allows idealists to survive. There it was. The old accusation wrapped in velvet. Olivia cared too much, hesitated too often, questioned contracts that others would have signed before reading to Eleanor. Empathy was an expensive flaw. To Victor, conscience was a weakness waiting to be exploited. Before Olivia could answer, the lights dimmed. The host introduced her with ceremonial enthusiasm, listing numbers that sounded unreal even to Olivia. 74 offices worldwide, 26,000 employees, active protection contracts across 5 continents. Applause rose like weather. Olivia walked onto the stage. The brightness hit her first, then the silence. She looked out at the faces, diplomats, generals, competitors, family, press. People who wanted reassurance that Aegis Horizon could guard nations. People who wanted proof that she could guard herself. For a moment, she thought of her father standing in his study years ago, telling her that security was not the art of building walls. It was knowing who you were building them for. Her fingers relaxed against the podium. Security, she began, voice steady, has too often been sold as fear with better branding. At Aegis Horizon, we believe the future belongs not to those who watch the world most aggressively, but to those who protect it most responsibly. A ripple passed through the room. Interest, approval, discomfort. Good, Olivia thought. Let them be uncomfortable. She spoke of ethical systems, civilian oversight, crisis response, and the new government partnership that would expand emergency infrastructure protection across allied nations. She did not speak like a woman asking permission. She spoke like someone who had paid for every inch of ground beneath her feet. Halfway through the presentation, a small red icon flashed at the corner of the teleprompter. Olivia noticed because she had trained herself to notice everything. It disappeared. Her next sentence continued without pause, but something inside her had already gone still. At the back of the hall, her security director, Marcus Vale, touched his earpiece. His expression changed only slightly, but Olivia saw it, a tightening around the mouth. A glance toward the side entrance, another guard moving too quickly. The summit screen behind her shifted. For less than 2 seconds, the Aegis emblem vanished. In its place appeared a black rectangle, empty except for a thin white symbol that looked almost like a lantern with its flame extinguished. Then the screen went dark, a breathless silence fell. Cameras turned. Someone gasped. A minister stood. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hall in pale gold. Olivia did not move. She felt every eye strike her, each one carrying a different verdict. Failure, breach, weakness. Marcus approached the stage fast but controlled. Mother Hart, he said under his breath. We need to move you. She smiled toward the audience. Because women like her were not allowed to look shaken even when the floor shifted beneath them. Ladies and gentlemen, she said into the microphone. It seems someone was eager to test our response protocols. Please remain seated while our security team verifies the system. A few nervous laughs broke the tension. Not enough. Marcus reached her side. Now, this time, she let him guide her down the side stairs. Behind the velvet partition, the summit's elegance dissolved into motion. Guards speaking into radios, technicians bent over laptops, staff members whispering into phones. Mia hurried toward Olivia, face pale. Are you hurt? No, did you see the symbol? Yes. Marcus led them into a private operations room, overlooking the hall from behind tinted glass. Victor was already there, speaking sharply to 2 executives. Eleanor sat near the conference table, as though emergencies had been scheduled around her convenience. Victor turned as Olivia entered. Do you understand what just happened? Olivia removed her earpiece. A breach occurred during a live international summit. So yes, Victor, I have a general understanding. This is exactly what the board feared. The board feared many things, most of them imaginary. That symbol wasn't imaginary, he snapped. Eleanor lifted one hand. Enough, this is not the time for family theater. Olivia looked at Marcus. How deep? We're still tracing. Presentation system only at first glance. No evidence is accessed client archives or operational networks. At first glance, Marcus hesitated. The entry point was clean, too clean. Mia stood very still beside the door. Olivia noticed that too. The rest of the night unfolded in a blur of containment. Public statements were drafted. The contract announcement was delayed, not cancelled. Reporters were told the interference had been isolated. Investors were reassured. Ministers were escorted to secure lounges and given enough champagne to soften their irritation. By midnight, Olivia's smile had become something mechanical. By 2 a.m, she stood alone on the terrace outside her hotel suite, looking down at the lake. Geneva's lights trembled on the water. Her phone had not stopped vibrating for 5 hours. The headlines were already forming. Aegis Horizon breached during global summit. Olivia Hart's leadership questioned after security failure. Hart family divided over crisis response. She closed her eyes. For one small dangerous moment, she wished she could be ordinary. Not poor, not powerless. Not free of responsibility, just unseen. A woman on a balcony in the cold, allowed to be tired without it becoming a market signal. The door opened behind her. Marcus stepped out, carrying a tablet and the expression of a man preparing to say something unwelcome. Say it, Olivia murmured. I want to bring in an outside consultant. She opened her eyes. We have the best cyber forensics team in Europe working downstairs. This isn't just cyber. The breach touched physical access logs, internal routing and event timing. Whoever did this understood protective procedure. You think my team failed. I think your team may be too close to the architecture to see the blind spots. Olivia turned. Who? James Walker? The name meant nothing to her. Former Special Forces, Marcus continued. Advised coalition security teams in hostile zones. After discharge, did private threat assessments for a few agencies. Then disappeared into a coastal town and started fixing engines. Olivia stared at him. You want me to hire a mechanic? I want you to hire a man who survived situations our executives only simulate. If he's so exceptional, why is he repairing boats? Marcus's gaze did not waver. Maybe because surviving isn't the same as wanting applause. That answer stayed with her longer than it should have. 2 days later, Olivia's helicopter descended through low grey clouds toward a small coastal town that looked untouched by the language of billion-dollar contracts. The air smelled of salt, rain, and diesel. Fishing boats rocked in the harbor. Seagulls cried over weathered rooftops. Nothing here seemed designed to impress anyone. Olivia stepped onto the tarmac in a camel coat and heels unsuited for wet pavement. Mia followed with a folder pressed to her chest. Marcus walked ahead toward a garage near the water, its sign half faded. Walker Marine and Auto. Inside, a man in a dark thermal shirt stood beneath the raised hood of an old truck, forearms marked with grease. Hair cut short, posture relaxed in a way that did not feel careless. He looked up when they entered. James Walker was not what Olivia expected. No polished consultant's suit, no eager handshake, no practiced deference. He had steady grey eyes, a scar near his jaw, and the kind of stillness that made the noisy garage seem to arrange itself around him. Marcus spoke first. Walker. James wiped his hands on a rag. Vale, you look terrible. You still talk too much. There was affection in the insult. Faint but real. Marcus turned. James Walker, Olivia Hart. James looked at her, not at her coat, not at the watch half hidden under her sleeve, not with the quick calculation she was used to from people estimating her value, influence, danger, or usefulness. He looked at her face. For some reason it annoyed her. Mr. Walker, she said, Ms. Hart. His voice was calm, low, unvarnished. I assume Marcus explained the situation. He said somebody embarrassed your company in front of half the world. Mia inhaled softly. Marcus looked at the ceiling. Olivia's expression cooled. It's the useful one. And you specialize in useful interpretations. I specialize in staying alive." The words landed between them with an unexpected weight. Olivia studied him. "I need discretion, precision, a complete assessment of the summit breach and my current protection structure. If you accept, you'll report directly to me." "No," she blinked. "Excuse me. I don't report to people who want agreement more than truth." Mia's eyes widened. Olivia felt a strange heat rise beneath her ribs. She was accustomed to opposition. She was not accustomed to being refused before making an offer. "You know nothing about what I want." James tossed the rag onto a workbench. "I know you flew here in a helicopter to ask for help and still walked in. Like help is something you're purchasing by the pound." The garage went quiet except for rain ticking against the metal roof. Olivia smiled then, not warmly. "And I know you confuse rudeness with integrity." For the first time, something almost like amusement crossed his face. "Usually saves time." Marcus stepped in before the air could sharpen further. "James, look at the files." James looked at him for a long moment. Whatever history lived between them remained unspoken, but Olivia saw it pass. Trust, grief, debt. Finally, James reached for the folder in Mia's hand. He spread the summit diagrams and access reports across a scarred wooden table, pushing aside a coffee mug and a socket wrench. Olivia watched his hands move. Rough, steady, careful, hands that had held weapons, repaired engines, maybe carried the dying. She disliked that the thought came to her at all. For 20 minutes, he said almost nothing. He studied camera angles, badge logs, service corridors, staff assignments, timing sequences. He asked Marcus 3 questions and Ma 1. He did not ask Olivia anything, which irritated her more than his questions might have. At last, he pointed to the screen capture of the black symbol. "Who recognized this?" "No one officially," Olivia said. "Unofficially?" She hesitated. "My aunt reacted before anyone explained it." James's eyes lifted. It was the first time he looked not merely at Olivia, but through the wall of her composure to the room behind it. "And your cousin?" Angry, too angry or not angry enough? The question unsettled her. She thought of Victor's face in the operations room, his outrage perfectly timed, his accusations ready before the system report had even loaded. "I don't know," she said, and hated the honesty. James leaned over the tablet Marcus had brought and replayed the breach footage, once, twice. Then again at half speed, the garage light flickered above them. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the harbor into silver lines. Olivia stood beside him, close enough to smell motor oil, cold air, and coffee. This man had no place in her world. He had no interest in entering it. Yet watching him work, she felt a reluctant shift inside her, the first hairline crack in the certainty that wealth could summon every answer. James paused the footage at the exact second before the symbol appeared. His face changed, not dramatically, just enough. A tightening of the jaw, a shadow behind the eyes, old and sudden. "What is it?" Olivia asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he zoomed in on a timestamp, then on a maintenance credential, used to access the media control corridor 7 minutes before Olivia's keynote. The credential had cleared security from inside the summit's protected network. James looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he turned to Olivia, and for the first time since they had met, there was no bluntness in his expression. No irritation, no class divide, no mechanic and billionaire standing on opposite sides of a scarred table, only warning. "This was not an outside attack," he said quietly. "Someone close to you opened the door." The sentence settled into the room like a blade placed carefully on glass. Olivia did not move at first. In her life, betrayal had always worn elegant clothes. It came in boardroom smiles, in family toasts, in clauses hidden behind legal tenderness. But this was different. This was not a hostile acquisition or a shareholder whispering to a journalist. This was someone allowing danger close enough to touch her skin, close enough to choose the moment. She looked at the frozen security footage, at the corridor she had walked through less than 12 hours ago, in heels chosen by a stylist and confidence chosen by necessity. The badge on the screen belonged to one of her own systems, one of her own people. That credential could have been cloned, she said. James's eyes did not leave the screen. It could have, but you don't think so. I think people who want you to believe in systems usually know where systems stop seeing. The words should have irritated her. They did a little. Olivia Hart had built Aegis Horizon into a global security empire by trusting structure, encryption, protocol, and the kind of power that made governments answer her calls at midnight. She did not like being told that the thing she understood best had a blind spot shaped like a human hand. Still, she heard the steadiness in his voice. Not panic, not performance assessment. That was why, 20 minutes later, she offered him a temporary consulting agreement from across the steel table in his garage office. James stared at the document as though she had placed a decorative snake in front of him. 30 days, Olivia said. Protection review, threat assessment, personnel audit. You'll have access to my routes, resident security, and executive detail. I don't work for corporations. You worked for the military. That was different, because the uniforms were less expensive. He looked up then, and the silence between them warmed with friction, because the men beside me didn't call sacrifice a quarterly expense. Olivia's fingers tightened on the edge of the folder. There it was again, that blunt contempt, not just for her company, but for her entire world. The world that had shaped her, used her, praised her, doubted her, and still expected her to stand at the head of it, with flawless lipstick and no visible wounds. I'm not asking you to worship the logo, she said. I'm asking you to tell me who opened the door. James leaned back, folding his arms. The light over the table cut hard lines across his face, revealing old exhaustion beneath the stubbornness. And if that answer points to someone with your last name? Olivia did not blink, though something in her chest recoiled. Then I'll need someone around me who isn't impressed by it. For the first time, James seemed almost willing to believe she had not said it as a performance almost. He picked up the pen, signed his name without ceremony, and slid the contract back. His signature was spare, angular, practical, like a man who did not waste ink on flourish. Temporary, he said. Vary your current security team reports to me on movement decisions. No, then hire someone else. Olivia gave him a thin smile. You're very comfortable being difficult for a man who just signed my contract. I signed to keep you alive, not comfortable. That became the shape of their first day together. At 9 in the morning, James arrived at Hart Tower in a dark jacket that did not pretend to be luxury, walked past the marble lobby without looking impressed, and silently offended nearly everyone on the executive protection floor. Olivia watched through the glass wall of the command center as he reviewed her security detail. Her team was immaculate. Tailored suits, discreet earpieces, gym-polished physiques, resumes full of private academies and diplomatic events. They were trained to move like shadows, but photograph like prestige. James studied them for 5 minutes and said, half of them look like they were hired to reassure shareholders. The head of Olivia's detail, Marcus Vale, stiffened. We've protected Ms. Hart across 19 countries, and yet someone walked a threat into her summit through your internal corridor. Marcus's face flushed. Olivia stepped in before pride escalated into something useless. Mr. Walker is here to review vulnerabilities, not insult your haircuts. James glanced at one of the men nearest him. That one keeps checking his reflection in the dark monitor. The guard's neck reddened. Olivia inhaled slowly. She had led negotiations with ministers, crisis-managed kidnappings, buried competitors under evidence without raising her voice. Yet by noon, James Walker had made her feel like she was hosting a wolf in a showroom full of porcelain. He rejected her usual route from Hart Tower to her penthouse because it passed 2 construction sites. He refused the armored car her team favored. because the rear camera had a half-second delay. He asked her driver about his daughter's school schedule, then later told Olivia that the man was distracted and should not be on night detail. "You can't remove someone because he has a family," she said sharply. "I didn't say remove him from payroll. I said don't put him behind your wheel tonight. You make judgments very quickly." "No, I notice quickly. Judgment comes after. And who judges you?" That stopped him for the smallest beat. Then he said, "Mostly ghosts." The answer landed before Olivia could defend herself from it. She saw briefly a darkness he had not intended to show her. It was gone in an instant, shut behind discipline, but not before it changed the air. She said nothing more. By evening, she was dressed for her Aunt Eleanor's charity dinner, an annual event wrapped in gold light, old money, and the soft violence of impeccable manners. The Hart Foundation had chosen veterans' rehabilitation as its theme that year, which Olivia had once found meaningful now. With James sitting across from her in the car, silent and watchful, the choice felt almost cruel. The dinner was held at the Harrington Museum, beneath vaulted ceilings and crystal chandeliers that had survived wars, scandals, and renovations, funded by people who preferred their names carved into stone. Eleanor Hart greeted Olivia near the entrance with both hands extended, diamonds cool against Olivia's skin. "My darling girl," Eleanor said, kissing the air beside her cheek. "You look tired. You must stop letting the company consume you. I'll try to schedule weekness next week." Eleanor smiled as if Olivia had made a charming joke. Her gaze shifted to James, and this must be the consultant. James offered a polite nod. James Walker, no rank, not anymore. How humble. Eleanor's smile thinned in a way only Olivia would have noticed. "We're honoring men like you tonight. Men like you." The phrase was wrapped in silk and still managed to cut. Olivia felt James's silence beside her, not defensive, not embarrassed, simply present, that somehow made her angrier than if he had snapped back. Victor Hart appeared with a champagne flute in hand, handsome in the effortless way of men who had never had to wonder whether a room would welcome them. He hugged Olivia with cousinly warmth for the cameras, then looked James up and down. "Liv, I didn't know we were inviting staff to donor seating." Olivia's smile hardened. "Then it's fortunate you're not in charge of seating." Victor laughed lightly, inviting the nearby guests to join him. "Relax, I admire service, truly. I just assumed Mr. Walker would be more comfortable near the security entrance." James said nothing. Olivia turned toward him, expecting anger, pride, some flash of the man who had spent all day dismantling her systems with bare words. But James was not looking at Victor, he was looking up, at the chandelier above the central table. At first, Olivia thought he was ignoring the insult out of stubborn discipline. Then she noticed his body had changed, not visibly to anyone else perhaps. His shoulders remained relaxed, his hands empty at his sides, but something in him had narrowed, concentrated. "James?" she murmured. He lowered his gaze to the room, sweeping it once. Waiters moving between tables, a photographer adjusting lenses near the stage, Eleanor guiding donors toward the central seating arrangement, Victor lingering too close to Olivia, smiling for an approaching society columnist. Then James stepped slightly closer to her. "We're not sitting there," he said under his breath. Olivia followed his glance to her assigned seat, center table, beneath the largest chandelier, beside Eleanor and two senators, a place designed to be photographed, admired, and interpreted as power. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered. "There are 200 guests watching." "Good. Good? If they're watching us, they might miss who's watching the ceiling." Her pulse shifted. Eleanor called from the table, gracious and commanding. "Olivia, dear, we need you here for the opening photograph." The photographer raised his camera. Victor touched Olivia's elbow as if guiding her into place. The gesture was casual, familial, possessive enough to make James's eyes flicker. "Liv, don't make Aunt Eleanor wait," Victor said softly. People are already wondering after yesterday's incident. There it was. The subtle pressure, the public frame. If she refused, she would look shaken. If she obeyed, she would be exactly where everyone wanted her. Olivia hated that James saw the trap before she did. She also hated that in that second, she trusted him. James did not grab her. He did something worse for the cameras and better for her dignity. He stepped in front of her with quiet finality and spilled a glass of red wine across the hem of her pale gown. A collective gasp moved through the nearest guests. Olivia stared at him.
For half a breath?
Pure fury rose in her chest. Then James leaned close enough that only she heard him. Walk with me now. His voice was not urgent. It was calm, and that terrified her more. Olivia lifted her chin, turned from the central table, and walked toward the side corridor with James at her shoulder, while murmurs unfurled behind them like smoke. Victor's voice followed, edged with irritation. Olivia, is everything all right? James guided her past a floral arch, past a waiter whose tray trembled, past an antique mirror reflecting the chandelier above the table where she should have been standing. They had taken 7 steps beyond the photographer's mark when the sound came. Not a crash at first. A metallic scream, a cable snapping under tension. Then the chandelier fell. Crystal exploded over the central table in a rain of light and violence. The sound was enormous, monstrous, impossible in that elegant room. Guests screamed, chairs overturned, someone shouted for medical help. The orchestra's soft prelude shattered into silence. Olivia froze. For one suspended second, she saw the empty space where she would have been, her chair crushed beneath twisted brass, her name card buried under glass. Eleanor stood several feet away, pale and motionless, one hand pressed to her throat. Victor's champagne flute had fallen from his hand, spilling gold across the marble like something cowardly and bright. James moved immediately. He did not ask if Olivia was all right because his eyes had already checked her face, hands, posture, breathing. Instead, he placed her behind a stone column and spoke to Marcus, who had rushed toward them with his team. Lock exits. No one leaves through staff corridors. Get medics to the north side first. Most injuries are from shrapnel and keep cameras away from her. Marcus hesitated for a fraction too long, still offended by the man giving orders. Olivia's voice cut through the chaos. Do as he says. That command changed the room more effectively than any scream. James glanced at her once. There was no triumph in his expression, no smugness, only a grim confirmation that being right had cost them something. Olivia looked down at her wine-stained gown. Minutes ago, she had been angry about it. Now the red spread across the pale fabric like a warning she had survived by inches. Eleanor approached, slowly, face rearranged into concern. My God, Olivia, if Mr. Walker hadn't been so clumsy. James looked at her. The pause was brief, but Olivia felt it. Eleanor had almost turned survival into accident, almost turned him into a servant who had stumbled at the perfect time. Olivia heard herself say quietly, he wasn't clumsy. Eleanor's gaze moved to her niece. Something cool passed between them, old and veiled. Of course not, darling, she said. What a fortunate instinct. Fortunate. James's jaw tightened. He left Olivia with Marcus and moved toward the fallen chandelier. Security tried to stop him. He ignored them with the calm of a man accustomed to worse obstacles than polished event staff. Kneeling among the broken crystal, he examined the cable, the severed mount, the way the brass had torn free. Olivia followed despite Marcus's protest. Don't touch anything, James said without looking back. I own the company securing this event. And someone used that fact. She stopped beside him. Up close, the wreckage looked less like an accident. The main cable had not frayed from age. The cut was too clean, the collapse too timed. James reached into the damaged ceiling mount with a folded cloth taken from a waiter's dropped napkin. His fingers closed around something small, black and deliberate. When he drew it out, Olivia felt the room tilt. It was no larger than a coin, embedded with a contact pin and a burned filament. A micro trigger, not commercial, not theatrical, not something used for faulty museum hardware. James turned it under the light. On the edge, almost hidden beneath soot, was a stamped code. Olivia recognized the prefix before her mind allowed the meaning. Aegis Horizon Internal Classification. Restricted military-grade inventory. James looked up at her then, and whatever distance had remained between their worlds narrowed into something cold and irreversible. "This wasn't just close to you," he said in his palm. Inside the broken chandelier mount lay a military-grade microtrigger stamped with a code only Aegis Horizon should possess. For 3 seconds after James showed her the microtrigger, Olivia Hart did not move. Around them, the charity gala continued in broken fragments. Someone was crying near the velvet rope. Security was pushing reporters back with polite but immovable hands. A violinist, shocked into silence, still held her bow in mid-air as if music might return, if she waited long enough. Above the polished marble floor, dust from the shattered chandelier drifted through the golden light like ash. Olivia looked at the tiny black device in James's palm and felt, with a strange calmness, the shape of her life-changing Aegis Horizon had built its name on prediction, risk assessment, threat elimination. The company had guarded presidents, royal families, oil fields, data centers, witnesses, embassies, and children of men powerful enough to start wars with phone calls. Her father had once told her that a security company did not sell fear, it sold the right to sleep. Tonight, someone had taken that right from her in her own event under her own guards, using her own company's equipment. James closed his fingers around the trigger before anyone else could see the code. "Who has access to this inventory?" he asked. Olivia's first instinct was not fear, it was calculation, that frightened her more than the attack. "Too many departments," she said quietly. "Restricted doesn't mean impossible, it means logged. Then pull the logs." "I will, now." Her eyes lifted to his. "Not here." He stared at her, and there it was again, that hard, unpolished judgment in him, like a blade that had never learned court manners. "Olivia, someone just tried to kill you. And if I announce that a restricted Aegis component was used at a public event, 2 days before the federal contract vote, our stock collapses before sunrise, the board panics by noon, and the Department of Defense freezes negotiations before anyone knows the truth." "Good," James said. The single word struck her harder than if he had shouted. Her voice cooled. "Good? If your company has a breach, it should stop pretending it doesn't." A flash went off nearby. Olivia turned slightly, presenting the cameras with her practiced profile. Steady, composed, untouchable. Her evening gown was torn at the hem where James had dragged her out of the chandelier's path. There was a thin red line across her collarbone from falling glass. But her face, the face on magazine covers and investor calls, remained flawless. Only James was close enough to see the tiny tremor in her hand. "Give it to me," she said. He did not. For a moment, surrounded by her employees, her guests, her name embroidered on banners behind them, Olivia felt the absurdity of it. She was one of the most powerful women in the country, and this man in a worn black suit rented by her security team was refusing to hand over evidence inside her own event. "James, not until I know it won't disappear." The quietness of his suspicion entered, her like cold water. She stepped closer. "You think I would hide an attempted murder? I think rich people have a talent for burying anything that threatens the view from the top." Olivia smiled then, but the warmth had left it. "And I think soldiers have a talent for believing that only blood is honest." His jaw tightened. That was where their working relationship stood at midnight, saved by his reflexes, endangered by her control, united by evidence, divided by everything the evidence could destroy. By dawn, Aegis Horizon private operations floor was awake. The 47th floor of Hart Tower did not appear in guest brochures or media profiles. It had no reception desk, no designer sculpture, No wall of awards. It was quiet, white, windowless, and built for containment. Rows of analysts sat behind curved glass partitions, reviewing live feeds, personnel movement, encrypted logistics, and contract risk maps across 12 countries. The air carried the clean scent of filtered ventilation and coffee. No one had time to drink. Olivia entered in the same gown she had worn the night before, now covered by a black coat, her hair pinned back with severe precision. James followed in silence. He had refused the car waiting for him, and driven himself in a battered pickup that looked deeply offended to be parked between two armored Bentleys. Mia Chen was already waiting outside the operations room, tablet hugged to her chest, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Preliminary report," Mia said. "We sealed the gala site. Local police have accepted our explanation of structural failure pending inspection. No press has the device image. I killed 3 mentions on social before they spread." Olivia took the tablet. "Good." James looked at Mia. "Structural failure?" Mia hesitated. Olivia did not. "For now, for investors." James said. "For stability." Olivia corrected. He gave a short laugh with no humor. "That word does a lot of work in this building." Mia's gaze moved between them, careful and unreadable. Olivia noticed the tension in her assistant's shoulders, the way her fingers pressed too tightly against the tablet edge. Mia had been with her for 5 years. She knew Olivia's calendar better than Olivia did. She knew when to cancel dinners Olivia had agreed to out of guilt, when to put honey in her tea during quarterly reviews, when to stand between Olivia and people who wanted pieces of her disguised as loyalty. Tonight, even Mia looked like a stranger under fluorescent light. "Internal only," Olivia said. "No broad disclosure. We isolate access to restricted inventory, verify chain of custody, and identify anyone who touched that trigger or its component batch in the last 6 months." James folded his arms. "And if the person tries again in the meantime, they won't. You don't know that. I know they failed. That doesn't make them patient. It makes them motivated." Olivia turned sharply. "What would you have me do? Call a press conference and tell the world Aegis Horizon can't secure its own CEO? Invite every short seller, competitor, and hostile actor to attack us before I even know which door was opened? I would have you protect people before protecting a logo." The room grew a little quieter. Analysts pretended not to hear, which meant they heard everything. Olivia's expression did not change, but something behind her ribs bent. She had spent a lifetime being told that emotion was the luxury of people not responsible for payroll, contracts, families, pensions, consequences. She had learned to measure panic in market movement and grief in legal exposure. She had learned young that a heart did not fall apart in public because too many people were waiting to profit from the pieces. "You think I don't know people are involved?" she asked. "I think you're trained to call them assets so you don't have to feel what happens to them." The words hit their mark because there was enough truth in them to bruise. Mia inhaled softly. Olivia looked at James for a long second. Then she said, low enough that only he and Mia could hear, "And I think you are trained to throw yourself in front of bullets, because dying for someone is easier than figuring out how to live after you survive." For the first time since she had met him, James looked as if she had struck him. His face closed almost instantly, but not before she saw it. The grief beneath the discipline, the wound that had never healed because he kept saluting it instead of touching it. Daniel Price's name was not spoken, but it moved between them like a ghost. James stepped back. "At least sacrifice protects someone." "Not always," Olivia said. "Sometimes it only leaves the living with another grave." He turned away. First, the victory, if it was one, tasted unbearable. At 10 that morning, Victor Hart arrived with sunlight on his shoulders and concern arranged beautifully across his face. He belonged effortlessly in the upper floors of Hart Tower. Tall, elegant, with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never had to prove he deserved entry anywhere. Victor moved through employees, greetings like a prince accepting weather. He kissed Olivia lightly on the cheek in the board anteroom while James watched from near the glass wall. "Liv," Victor said softly. "I came as soon as Eleanor called. Are you hurt?" "No, don't do that." His smile dimmed into something intimate and practiced. "Don't answer like a quarterly report." Olivia allowed herself no reaction. "I'm handling it." "I'm sure you are." He glanced toward James. Though perhaps handling it quietly is not the same as handling it wisely. There it was, wrapped in velvet. Olivia set her tablet on the conference table. "Say what you came to say." Victor sighed, as though reluctant to be reasonable. "The board is nervous. The government vote is critical. If there is even a rumor that your personal protection has been compromised, confidence suffers. You're exhausted. You were nearly injured. And frankly, some people are questioning whether your judgment is affected." James's eyes sharpened. Olivia's smile was faint. "Some people who care about the company. Do they also care about me? Or would that be inefficient?" Victor's expression softened further. He had mastered the art of looking wounded when he was really applying pressure. "You know I care, but leadership means knowing when to step aside temporarily. Let me address the board. Let me reassure them. You remain CEO, of course, but I can be the steady face until this is contained." James understood then why Olivia's world exhausted her. Threats here did not always kick down doors. Sometimes they wore family resemblance, spoke in affectionate nicknames, and offered help shaped exactly like a cage. Olivia looked at her cousin, and for one heartbeat the billionaire mask thinned. Behind it was a woman who had probably once believed family meant refuge. Then the mask returned. "No," she said. Victor's eyes cooled by a fraction, only a fraction. "Pride is expensive, Liv. So is cowardice." He smiled again, but it no longer reached anywhere human. "Be careful who you trust right now." His gaze flicked to James, lingering on the imperfect tie, the scar near his temple, the stillness that did not belong to boardrooms, especially men who have nothing to lose. After Victor left, James expected Olivia to make some sharp comment. Instead, she stood for a moment with one hand resting on the back of a chair, looking at the closed door. "He wants your seat," James said. "He's wanted many things." "And your aunt?" Olivia's mouth curved, tired and sad. "Eleanor believes wanting is proof of deserving." She walked back toward the operations floor, and James followed. He had thought money built walls. He had been wrong. Money built windows too, wide, glittering, merciless windows through which everyone could watch you bleed and debate whether the blood affected quarterly confidence. The deeper he entered Olivia Hart's world, the more obvious it became that wealth had not protected her. It had made her visible. It had made her valuable. It had made her a target inside her own home. By afternoon, the access logs began to surface. Mia stood with two senior analysts before a wall display. Lines of code, personnel, clearance tiers, timestamp discrepancies, and inventory chains layered across the screen. Olivia listened without interrupting, arms crossed, eyes dark with concentration. James watched the people instead of the data. One analyst was nervous because he was afraid of being wrong. The other was nervous because he was afraid of being right. Mia highlighted a sequence. The micro-trigger batch was signed out from restricted storage 11 weeks ago under a maintenance exception. Olivia frowned. Maintain for what? That's the issue. The work order is blank. Who approved it? Mia hesitated long enough for James to notice. The digital approval key belongs to your office, she said. Silence fell. Olivia's face did not change, but James saw the pressure land. Her own office, her own authority, her own name turned into a weapon. I didn't approve it, Olivia said. I know. Mia answered too quickly. James looked at her. Mia lowered her eyes back to the tablet. The authorization pathway was masked through executive archive protocols, very old architecture. I've only seen fragments like this in what legacy systems? James asked. Mia opened another file, then stopped. This folder is restricted above my clearance. Olivia stepped forward and entered her biometric credentials. The screen refused her. That refusal disturbed everyone more than a confession would have. Olivia tried again. A red denial flashed across the glass. Access locked. Historical compartmentalization protocol. James felt something cold settle in his stomach. Military bureaucracy had a smell even in digital form. Acronyms, sealed histories, dead men turned into redacted lines. He moved closer to the screen, reading the partial file path visible beneath the denial. A project archive, not current, not ordinary. The folder name was partially corrupted, but one access record remained, tied to the maintenance exception that had released the trigger. A string of letters appeared beneath an old classified prefix. B lantern. James went very still. He had seen that fragment once before, not in a boardroom, not on a corporate screen, but in a burned operations packet pulled from the wreckage of a mission that had taken Daniel Price away from him. Back then, the letters had meant nothing, just another blacked-out reference among too many secrets. Later, when the official report erased half the truth, he had remembered them with the useless clarity of survivors. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Black lantern. The effect was immediate. Olivia turned so pale that even the analysts noticed. The color drained from her face as if someone had opened an old wound beneath her skin. For a second, she was not the CEO of Aegis Horizon, not the woman who could face investors. Without blinking, not the heart heir trained to make fear look like strategy. She was simply afraid. Mia whispered, "Olivia." Olivia did not answer her. Her eyes were fixed on the words glowing across the wall display, and whatever she saw there was not only a file name, it was history. Family, something buried deep enough that even her own clearance could not reach it. Then her hand dropped to her side, fingers curling once, hard. "Everyone out," she said. No one moved. Olivia turned, and the command in her voice cut through the room like steel now. Everyone out of the room. The room emptied in a hush broken only by the soft retreat of chairs, the muted tap of shoes, the thin electronic hum of the wall display, still glowing with the name that had changed the air between them. Olivia remained standing where she was, one hand braced against the edge of the conference table, as if the polished wood were the only thing keeping her upright. The others had obeyed her instantly, but James did not move right away. He watched the way her shoulders stayed squared, the way she refused to let herself look shaken, even after that first flash of fear had stripped something human and raw across her face. When the door finally sealed behind the last analyst, the silence became intimate, in a way neither of them had asked for. Olivia reached out and shut the projection down herself. The room darkened, leaving only the pale strip of city light through the windows and the reflection of her own face in the glass, pale and tense and far too controlled. "I know the name," she said at last. James did not speak. He had learned long ago that if you rushed a wounded person, they built a wall so fast you would never find the door again. Olivia gave a short, humorless breath. Black Lantern was a classified security initiative. It wasn't public. It was not supposed to exist on any board record, any shareholder archive, any family conversation. Her eyes flicked once toward him, then away. "My father created it." The words landed with a dull force, not because James was surprised, but because he had not wanted them to be true. Olivia pressed her lips together. "According to what I was told as a teenager, it was a temporary overseas program. Intelligence coordination, surveillance support, extraction logistics. The official story is that it was shut down after an incident, a deadly incident." Her voice tightened on the last word. "After that, my father ordered every trace of it buried." James felt the old instinct rise in him like cold in the blood. Buried by who? Olivia's expression hardened immediately. By him, it was a shield. He understood that. Not honesty, not yet. A shield made from grief and loyalty, and the kind of love children never fully stop having for the people who raised them, even when those people leave behind broken things. James folded his hands behind his back so she would not see how tight they had gone. The project name was in the after-action report from my last mission. Her head lifted sharply. He kept his voice level, but the memory had already taken shape in him, exact and merciless. Heat, dust, the taste of metal and blood. Daniel shouting over the radio, then the sudden collapse of all sound, except the ringing in his ears. My unit was hit in an ambush. Someone had our route, our timing, our encrypted fallback points. We were told it was a leak from the regional contractor network. Black Lantern was mentioned once, by a man who knew better than to say it aloud. Olivia stared at him. The room seemed to narrow around the space between them. I didn't know, she said. But it sounded less like a defense than an injury. Maybe you didn't. That's not enough. No, he agreed quietly. It isn't. Her chin lifted a fraction, pride returning to her face like frost settling over water. My father was not a butcher, Mr. Walker. I didn't call him one. But you're thinking it. James looked at her then, fully, and saw the strain she was refusing to name. I'm thinking that your company's technology may have been involved in the operation that killed my friend. The sharp intake of her breath was almost inaudible, but it changed her. There were soldiers there, he added, men who never came home. Daniel Price was one of them. The name seemed to strike some deeper layer in her memory. Olivia's gaze moved unfocused for a second, as if she were searching old conversations, old family dinners, old silences. I've never heard that name. No reason you would have. Her voice, when it came, was quieter now. And you believe my father knew? James considered lying. It would have been easier, perhaps even kinder in that moment. But he had learned the hard way that kindness built on falsehood rotted fast. I believe someone in your family wanted that program hidden badly enough to kill for it. That did it. Not because it was cruel, but because it was close enough to the shape of her fear that she could not dismiss it. Her expression shuttered, and when she spoke again, her tone was cool enough to freeze the air. If you're accusing my father, then you're going to need more than a military grudge and a memory from a failed mission. He took that without flinching. I'm not accusing him yet. Yet, Olivia. No, she turned away from him, one hand going to the edge of the table again, this time not for balance but for control. You don't get to walk in here and turn my dead father into a villain because some classified phrase appeared on a screen. James stared at the line of her back. He could see the tremor she was trying to hide in her fingers. And there it was again, the thing that made him keep talking when he should have stopped. Not just the facts, the person under them. Did he ever tell you why he shut it down? She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. My father didn't explain himself. He protected, he provided, he made decisions. That was his way. She turned back to him, eyes bright with anger now. And for the record, I do not accept that he knowingly sent soldiers into an ambush. James nodded slightly. Good. Then we're both waiting for proof. The phrase should have ended it, but instead it hung between them. A small bridge built from mutual refusal to accept convenient answers. Olivia looked as though she hated that bridge for existing. James understood that too well. Sometimes the first crack in a wall felt less like relief and more like betrayal. A knock came at the door. Mia's voice was careful from the other side. Olivia, the board is asking whether you want the statement draft revised. Tell them no. There was a pause. And the meeting at the rehabilitation center. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, as if she had forgotten the rest of the day existed. Then she said, keep it on schedule. James looked at her. Rehabilitation center. She glanced at him with visible reluctance. A pediatric trauma and mobility clinic. Aegis funds it anonymously. Of course it does, he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes flashed. That sounded judgmental. It was. Why? He met her stare evenly. Because you fund children's recovery in secret, but you let your own board think you're made of glass and equations. For one instant she looked genuinely startled. Then, impossibly, something in her expression loosened. Do you always say exactly what you mean? Usually only when I'm being paid to be unpleasant. That almost smile she gave him was gone before it could settle fully. But James saw it. He saw the exhaustion beneath it too. An hour later, he found himself in the back of a black vehicle with Olivia, heading across the city toward a neighborhood, far from marble towers and boardroom glass. She had not asked him to come. She had merely looked at him after the meeting, as if remembering that he had once been a soldier, not a polished consultant, and said, "If you're determined to accuse my family, you should at least see what I spend my money on." The center occupied a renovated brick building with wide windows and a mural on the side painted by children's hands. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, crayons, and warm bread from the cafe next door. The laughter that drifted down the corridor was not careless laughter. It carried effort in it and recovery, and life being stitched back together, one ordinary afternoon at a time. Olivia moved differently here. James noticed it immediately. The precision remained, the posture, the expensive coat, but her face changed when a little boy in a brace called her name. She knelt without hesitation to his level, removed one glove, and let him show her the picture he had drawn of a robot with wings. "It's supposed to fly," the boy explained earnestly. "Then it should," Olivia said. And there was no corporate polish in her voice, only warmth. He watched her sit with a teenage girl learning to use her fingers again. He watched her ask the therapist practical questions with genuine attention. He watched the way she remembered names, injuries, favorite colors. No cameras followed her. No press office stood by. Nothing in her expression suggested she was performing compassion for an audience. This, James realized with a strange and uncomfortable turn in his chest, was the part of her the world never saw because she had hidden it so well. At the end of the corridor, Olivia paused near a glass playroom where two children were trying to build a tower from foam blocks. She stood there with her hands folded, watching them for longer than necessary. "You come here often," James said. She did not look at him. "When I can." "Why anonymous?" Her answer came after a brief silence. "Because if people knew it was me, they'd turn it into a story about the Hart family's generosity. I wanted the children to get help without being made into a backdrop." James looked at her in profile. In that moment she seemed younger, and older too, as though she had spent years learning how to carry too much, and had simply gotten good at it. "Your father taught you that?" "No." Her voice softened. "My mother used to sneak food to employees whose families were struggling. She hated being praised for what should have been ordinary decency." Olivia's mouth tightened. "I don't know when kindness became something the Harts were expected to advertise." James said nothing. He was thinking about the way she had spoken of her father, the way grief and loyalty were braided together so tightly, she could not separate them without pain. He knew that shape. He had lived in it for years after Daniel died, carrying anger so long it had begun to feel like identity. A small girl in a leg brace approached Olivia shyly with a stack of coloring pages. Olivia bent to accept them with both hands as if they mattered. They did. When the child ran off again, James said quietly, "This is the first place today that doesn't feel like a battlefield." Olivia's eyes shifted to him, guarded but less hard than before. "It is one, just with smaller weapons." He almost smiled at that. Almost as they left the center, the evening had begun to cool. The city lights were turning on, one by one, and the windows of the clinic glowed softly behind them, like a promise not yet fully understood. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The distance between them felt less like a wall now, and more like a narrow space. They were both afraid to cross too quickly. Then Olivia said, without looking at him, "If Black Lantern is connected to what happened to your unit, I need to know everything." James answered just as quietly, "Then you'll have to decide whether you still want the truth when it stops protecting your family." She did not reply. He watched her get into the car first, head held high, face composed again. But he had seen the crack. He had seen the compassion she hid beneath all that steel later. Alone in his apartment, James came home to silence and the dim light of one lamp. He set his keys down, loosened his jacket, and found an envelope on the floor inside his door. No return address, no name. The paper was thick, expensive, and cold in his hand. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. For a moment, he could not breathe. Daniel Price stood in the image beside Olivia's father, both men in plain clothes, both of them smiling with the tired, unguarded expression of people who had once believed the right thing could still be done in secret and in time. The background was unfamiliar, but the date stamped on the corner was not. James stared until the room blurred around the edges. Then he turned the photo over with fingers that had gone strangely numb and found only one line written on the back. "You were never supposed to survive this long." James did not sleep that night. The photograph lay on his kitchen table, beneath the yellow light, its edges curling slightly from the warmth of his palms. Daniel's face looked younger than James remembered. Not because the picture had been taken long ago, but because memory had a cruel habit of preserving the dead at the age of their last smile. Olivia's father stood beside him, Richard Hart, the man James had only known through corporate memorial videos and newspaper articles. Through Olivia's carefully controlled grief and the quiet reverence people used when speaking of founders who had become legends. In public records, Richard Hart had been a visionary. In military whispers, he had been a name attached to procurement deals, classified contracts, and the kind of decisions that never left fingerprints. But Daniel had trusted him enough to stand beside him, unarmed, unguarded, smiling. James turned the photograph over again. "You were never supposed to survive this long," the sentence seemed to breathe in the room. At dawn, he locked the photograph inside a metal case beneath his bed, then unlocked it 5 minutes later because hiding it felt too much like surrender. By 7, he had called in 2 old favors, one from a former signals officer who now repaired boat radios along the coast, another from a clerk at a veterans archive who still owed Daniel Price a kindness. By 9, he had already decided not to tell Olivia. That decision sat in his chest like a stone. He told himself it was because she might be watched, because anything connected to her father would pull her into danger, because if someone had sent the photograph to him, they wanted a reaction, and Olivia Hart was too important a piece on the board to move carelessly. But beneath all those reasonable excuses was a quieter truth. He was afraid. Afraid that her father had not been the man she believed. Afraid that Daniel had died, carrying a secret Olivia's family had buried. Afraid that if he placed the photo in her hands, he would see not guilt, but loyalty, to blood, to legacy, to a name carved into skyscrapers and charity halls. And if Olivia chose the Hart name over Daniel's memory, James did not know what would remain of the fragile thing growing between them. At Aegis Horizon that morning, the sky was a hard silver behind the glass tower. Employees moved through the lobby with their usual polished speed, coffee cups in hand, ID badges swinging, heels clicking against marble. But conversations thinned when James walked in. He felt it before he saw it. Eyes. Not the clean assessment of professionals, not the instinctive scan of security staff. This was something else. Curiosity sharpened into judgment. A junior analyst glanced up from his phone, then quickly looked away. 2 women near the elevators stopped whispering when he passed. A man from legal stared openly for half a second too long. James had lived through ambushes where silence had weight. This building had begun to feel like one. His phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number contained a link. He did not open it until he reached the security control floor. The headline struck with the blunt efficiency of a knife. Billionaire CEO hires violent ex-soldier as personal guard. Amid questions about stability below it was a photograph of James from 6 years ago, taken outside a military hospital. His hair had been shorter, his face thinner, his right hand bandaged after the explosion that had taken Daniel and 3 others. He remembered that day. He had been trying to leave without speaking to reporters. Someone had shouted Daniel's name. James had turned. The camera had caught grief and rage in the same instant. Now they had turned that moment into evidence. The article mentioned a pattern of aggression, disciplinary concerns, and sources close to the Hart board who feared Olivia's judgment had been compromised by her dependence on a man with battlefield trauma. It did not say James had been decorated. It did not say he had been cleared. It did not say that the only violence in his record had been the kind his country once praised until it became inconvenient. By noon, social media had made him into a monster. Clips circulated without context. Old service photos, a blurred video of him disarming the attacker at Olivia's charity event, slowed down until protection looked like brutality. Anonymous accounts called him unstable, dangerous, obsessed with Olivia Hart. Others made jokes about billionaires buying attack dogs. James watched for exactly 3 minutes, then turned off his phone. He had been hated before by people trying to kill him. That was easier. This was stranger, being dismantled by people who had never seen his face except through a screen. When Olivia found him, he was in one of the side corridors outside the executive level, speaking in a low voice to the former signals officer from the coast. "I need confirmation on the date stamp," James said, "and if there's any trace of the facility in the background. No, don't send it through email." He turned and saw her standing 10 feet away. Her cream suit made her look composed, almost untouchable, but her eyes were not composed at all. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. James ended the call. For a moment they only looked at each other. Between them lay everything unsaid. The photograph, the article, last night's almost trust, and the thin, invisible line that separated protection from secrecy. "A friend," he said. Olivia's expression shifted by 1 degree, enough for him to recognize hurt disguised as caution. "You have been avoiding me since morning. I've been working for me." The question should not have stung, it did. James slipped the phone into his pocket. "Is that what we're doing now? Checking ownership?" "No." Her voice softened, then hardened again as if softness had betrayed her first. "I'm asking whether you found something and decided I couldn't be trusted with it." He looked at her, and the photograph burned in his memory. "You have a board meeting in 20 minutes, he said. Olivia gave a small humorless laugh. "That is not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." Something in her face closed. James had watched steel doors seal on armored vehicles. He had heard the final click before a room became unreachable. Olivia's face did not move much, but he felt the same sound. "Then perhaps the article is not entirely wrong," she said quietly. "Perhaps I did bring someone into my life who answers to no one." He should have walked away. Pride told him to. Pain almost made him. Instead, he stepped closer. "And perhaps you only trust loyalty when it comes with a contract." Her eyes flashed. "That is unfair." "Yes," he said. The admission disarmed both of them. For one breath, the corridor felt too narrow for all their defenses. Olivia's hands were clasped before her, but he noticed the pressure of her fingers, the pale strain at her knuckles. She was not angry only because he had kept something from her. She was angry because she had begun to rely on him, and reliance, to Olivia Hart, was a room with no exits. "I saw the press release draft," James said. Her gaze flickered. "You're considering distancing the company from me. It was prepared by communications, not by me, but you read it." "I read everything that can damage Aegis." "And what did you decide?" There it was, the question neither of them wanted, because it was no longer about employment. It was about whether she would stand beside him while the room turned cold. Olivia looked away first. James felt the answer before she gave it. "The board wants you removed from active duty until this is contained," she said. "They are using investor pressure, client calls, government partners. If I refuse without evidence, they will make this about my judgment. And if you agree..." Z's grew enormous. He nodded as if she had spoken. "Understood, James." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him, not because it was commanding, because it was almost breaking. "I have protected people my entire life by making the decision that costs less," she said. "The company, employees, families depending on our contracts. I know how to choose the lesser damage. And I'm the lesser damage." No, the word came too quickly, too honestly. He looked back. Olivia stood beneath the white corridor light, all her wealth and power suddenly useless against the simple human terror of saying too much. "No," she repeated. Lower, I hesitated. James had faced gunfire with steadier hands than he had at that moment. The urge to tell her rose in him. The photo, Daniel, her father, the warning. He wanted to place the truth between them and see if it could survive there. He wanted, more dangerously, to say that the thought of her shame hurt more than any headline, that somewhere between insults, danger, and late-night honesty, she had become the person whose silence could wound him. Olivia took one step closer. "What are you hiding from me?" she whispered, his answer lodged in his throat. Before he could speak, the elevator doors opened at the end of the corridor, releasing Victor Hart into the space like a well-timed storm. He was not alone. 3 board members followed him, along with 2 senior legal officers and a woman from communications whose face had gone pale from professional panic. Behind them, visible through the glass wall overlooking the atrium, a gathering crowd shifted near the main reception area. Reporters had somehow entered the building. Victor's gaze landed on Olivia, then on James, and his mouth shaped itself into concern. "Olivia," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need to resolve this before the market opens in New York." She straightened instantly. The almost confession vanished from her face, replaced by the CEO the world recognized. "How did reporters get past lobby clearance?" she asked. Victor sighed, as though disappointed by her focus. "That is not our immediate problem." "It is exactly our immediate problem." One of the board members, a silver-haired man named Whitcomb, stepped forward. "Ms. Hart, the issue is Mr. Walker. His presence has become untenable." James said nothing. He had learned long ago that men like Whitcomb heard silence as guilt and anger as confirmation. Olivia's eyes cut toward the atrium. Through the glass, phones were already raised. A reporter called her name, muffled but distinct. "Is it true your personal guard has a violent military record? Did Aegis conceal his psychological evaluation? Are you romantically involved with James Walker?" The last question struck harder than the rest, not because it was false, because neither of them had earned the right to say it was true. Olivia's face did not change, but James saw the pulse at her throat. Victor saw it too. His eyes brightened with something subtle and cruel. "This is what I warned you about," Victor murmured. "Personal attachments cloud leadership." James moved half a step forward, not touching him, just stopping him. A small gesture, a public one. To everyone else, it looked like restraint. To James, in that raw moment, it felt like distance. Victor turned toward the board. "Until a full review is completed, Mr. Walker should be escorted out and his access suspended." A strange calm descended over James. He had been abandoned in louder places, in deserts, in report, in rooms where commanders chose convenience over truth. He knew the shape of it now, even dressed in marble and glass. He looked at Olivia. "Say something," he thought, hating himself for needing it. Her lips parted. But before Olivia could speak, every phone in the corridor began to vibrate almost at once. The communications woman looked down first, her face drained of color completely. "Mrs. Hart," she said, "there's been another leak." Victor's expression sharpened, too fast to be surprise. Olivia took the tablet from the woman's hands. James saw the screen reflected faintly in the glass before she turned it toward him. A security clip was already spreading across the internal network and public feeds. Grainy, time-stamped, unmistakable. James Walker, alone, entering Aegis Horizon's restricted archive at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning the previous night. The same restricted archive from which confidential Black Lantern-related files had disappeared before dawn. For a few seconds, the entire corridor seemed to forget how to breathe. The clip kept looping on the tablet in Olivia's hand. James walking through a dim hallway. James lowering his head toward the archive scanner. James entering a door he had never touched. It was a simple piece of footage, almost boring in its certainty. That was what made it cruel. No dramatic music, no masked intruder, no hidden weapon. Just a man in a dark jacket moving with the quiet confidence of guilt around them. People began to step back from James, not far. Not enough to seem cowardly, only half a pace. A polite withdrawal, dressed as instinct. James noticed every inch of it. Victor was the first to speak, his voice grave and smooth. "Olivia, this has gone beyond internal discipline." Eleanor Hart stood beside him, elegant in grey silk, her face arranged into sorrow rather than shock. She had always worn grief like jewelry, Olivia thought suddenly, perfectly placed, never heavy enough to bend her spine. "We need to contact federal authorities," Eleanor said. "If classified files connected to Black Lantern have been compromised, we cannot be seen concealing it." James's jaw tightened at the name. Black Lantern. Even now, after all these years, the words had the power to turn the air metallic in his lungs. He saw again the flash over dry earth, Daniel's hand slipping from his grasp, the report that had erased men into footnotes. And now someone had placed him inside the crime that might finally lead back to the truth. Olivia lowered the tablet. "Lock down the archive access logs," she said. Victor's eyes narrowed. "We already have footage." "I said lock down the logs." Her voice was quiet, but something in it made the communications woman move at once. Victor took a step closer. "Olivia, you cannot manage this with tone. A consultant you hired against board advice has been caught entering a restricted archive, hours before sensitive documents vanished. If we hesitate, it looks like complicity. And if we rush," Olivia replied, "it looks like convenience." The corridor went still again, but differently this time. James looked at her. He had expected calculation. He had expected her to protect the company first, because people like Olivia Hart were raised to understand that reputation had a pulse, and shareholders were always listening. He had expected, at best, a private apology delivered after security escorted him out. He had not expected her to stand in front of a crowd and refuse the easy answer. Eleanor's expression did not change, but her voice softened into something sharper than anger. "My dear, sentiment is not leadership." Olivia turned to her aunt. "Neither is panic." Victor let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "This is insane. You are risking Aegis Horizon for him." The question struck the corridor with more force than it should have for him. Olivia felt it enter her chest and lodge there. She could not look at James then, because if she did, everyone would see what she had not yet named even to herself. That the man beside her had become more than a contract, more than an irritant who challenged her in rooms where everyone else bowed. He had become the first person in years who looked at her power and still asked what it cost. "I'm risking Aegis Horizon for due process," she said. "Suspend his access. Place him under internal review. No federal report until my forensic team verifies the footage." Victor's face hardened. "The board won't accept that." "Then the board can call me directly." Eleanor's gaze moved from Olivia to James. slow and assessing. 12 hours, she said. Olivia looked at her. If you insist on indulging doubt, Eleanor continued, you have 12 hours before we convene an emergency session. After that, if you have not acted, we will. It sounded like a compromise. It sounded like a warning. Olivia knew it was both. She handed the tablet back. Fine. James said nothing until they were inside the private elevator, descending away from the executive floor in a silence sealed by glass and steel. The city slid past them in blurred, silver lines. Olivia stood with one hand wrapped around the railing too tightly. You shouldn't have done that, James said at last. She looked at his reflection instead of his face. You're welcome. I'm not thanking you. I noticed. His mouth moved, not quite a smile, then it disappeared. You just put yourself in their crosshairs. I was already there. Not like this. Olivia turned then. The elevator lights softened the angles of his face, but they could not soften the exhaustion beneath his eyes. He looked angry, yes, but under the anger was something she recognized because it lived in her too. The terror of being believed only after the damage was permanent. Did you do it? She asked. He met her gaze without flinching. No one word, no ornament, no desperate defense. Some people lied by adding too much. James told the truth as if he had already survived not being believed. Olivia nodded once. Then you have 12 hours. His eyes changed, not dramatically. James was not a man who offered visible gratitude easily, but the hard line of his shoulders shifted, as if some weight had moved from bone to breath. Why? He asked. Because I know what it feels like to have family turned out into a weapon. Because, when everyone else stepped back, I wanted to step closer. Because if I don't trust you now, I become exactly what they think I am. Olivia said only, because the footage is wrong. The elevator opened before he could answer. They separated with professional precision. To anyone watching, Olivia returned to crisis management, while James disappeared into the lower security levels under monitored escort. But before the door shut between them, Olivia slipped him a slim access card from her sleeve. Her fingers brushed his palm, briefly. Barely still, the contact stayed with both of them longer than it should have. Backdoor clearance, she murmured. Forensic Bay 3, it expires in 12 hours. James closed his hand around the card. You realize this makes you an accessory if I'm guilty? I do, and if I'm not. Her eyes held his. Then someone wanted me to believe you were. For the first time that day, James felt something colder than accusation. He felt the outline of a trap built not only for him, but for her. The next hours broke into fragments of screens, access logs, and stale coffee. James worked alone in Forensic Bay 3 because he trusted machines more than sympathetic faces. The room was windowless, humming with servers and blue light. He pulled the leaked clip apart frame by frame, not as a technician seeking irregularities, but as a soldier searching terrain for what did not belong. The timestamp jittered once at 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 8 seconds. Not enough for ordinary review. The shadow under his left hand fell in the wrong direction for the archive corridor's lighting grid. The gate was close, but too clean. Whoever had built the image had studied surveillance of him, but not pain. They had copied his stride and missed the old injury in his right knee, the slight hesitation that came when he turned corners too sharply. By the 4th hour, he found the first watermark hidden in a compression artifact, not Aegis Horizon, a subcontractor, VeliSync Systems. James stared at the name, then ran cross-references through procurement shells. 3 layers deep, beneath software maintenance agreements and ghost consulting fees, VeliSync connected to a private trust. Hart Legacy Preservation Fund, Eleanor. He leaned back slowly, the blue light reflecting in eyes that had gone very still. At almost the same time, Olivia stood in her aunt's townhouse across the city, surrounded by old portraits and fresh flowers that smelled too sweet. Eleanor had not refused to see her. That, more than anything, told Olivia she had expected this visit. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows. The room glowed with lamps warm enough to forgive almost anything. Eleanor poured tea. Olivia did not sit. VeloSync systems altered the footage, she said. Eleanor placed the teapot down with delicate care. Is that what your soldier told you? My forensic review is ongoing. You mean his review? Olivia's hand curled at her side. VeloSync is tied to your fund. My fund supports many vendors. Family companies are complicated. You know that better than most. I know when someone is trying to remove me. At that, Eleanor finally looked at her fully. There was no more sorrow in her face now, no softness, only a clean, aristocratic disappointment that made Olivia feel briefly, absurdly, like a child who had entered the wrong room with muddy shoes. Remove you, Eleanor repeated. Olivia, I have spent years protecting you from the consequences of your own heart. My heart is not a corporate liability. No, Eleanor said calmly, it is worse. It is a door left open. Olivia felt the words land. Eleanor crossed the room to the portrait of Olivia's father, Nathaniel Hart, painted in the final year before his death. In oils, he looked composed, visionary, untouched by the fear Olivia had found later in his private letters. Your father was brilliant, Eleanor said, but in the end he became uncertain. He began to question tools that could have made this family untouchable. He mistook hesitation for morality. Olivia's voice dropped. Black Lantern. Eleanor did not deny it. That silence carried more confession than any speech. You framed James. I contained a threat. He is a person. He is a discharged soldier with trauma, motive, and no social protection. The public will understand his guilt. They will accept it neatly. Olivia took one step toward her. Do you hear yourself? I hear reality, Eleanor replied. Something you have avoided because people applaud your compassion in interviews. But compassion does not keep companies alive. It does not preserve legacy. It does not stop enemies from circling. And forging evidence does. Sometimes legacy requires unpleasant architecture. For a moment, Olivia could not speak. She had grown up believing cruelty arrived with raised voices, shattered glass. Doors slammed at midnight. But Eleanor's cruelty sat in silk and spoke of duty. It wore the family name like armor and called every wound a necessary cost. You think I'm weak, Olivia said. Eleanor's expression almost softened. I think you are loved by the public because you are useful to their fantasies. A beautiful billionaire with a conscience. But power is not a fairy tale. My dear, it is inheritance. It is control. And if you cannot hold properly, Victor will. There it was. Not concern. Olivia felt something inside her go very quiet. Not numb. Clear. My father tried to stop Black Lantern, she said. My father tried to slit, she said. Eleanor's gaze flickered. It was tiny. You don't know what your father did, Eleanor said. No, Olivia answered. But I'm beginning to know what you did. She left without touching the tea. Back at Aegis Horizon, James had moved beyond the footage. VeloSync's forged clip was only the cover. The missing files, recovered in fragments from a temporary extraction cache, were not project schematics as the leak implied. They were payments. Shell transfers routed through humanitarian logistics accounts. Bonuses disguised as consulting fees. Hazard payouts issued before the ambush that killed. Daniel had even been officially recorded. James read the transaction dates once, then again. His hands remained steady. That frightened him more than shaking would have. There was Daniel's unit designation, buried in a redacted line item. There was a convoy path correction, paid for 72 hours before they drove into the kill zone. There was an authorization chain that did not end with Olivia's father, as the old report claimed. It curved around him, past him, to accounts connected to Victor, to a dormant Eleanor-controlled security initiative, to Black Lantern assets that had never been shut down, only renamed. Daniel had not died in confusion. He had died in a purchased corridor of fire. James sat in the cold blue room and felt the past open under his feet. His phone buzzed. Olivia. "Tell me you have something," she said, breathless, as if she had been walking fast. "I have enough to make them kill for it." Silence. Then her voice lowered. "James." The way she said his name pulled him back from the edge of memory. "I'm coming to you," he said. "Underground garage. 10 minutes. Don't use your driver. Don't tell anyone where you are." "James, what did you find?" He looked at Daniel's name on the screen. "The reason they framed me." He copied the files onto 2 encrypted drives. One went into the lining of his jacket. The other he taped beneath the server desk, because survival had taught him never to trust a single exit. Then he left Forensic Bay 3 through the service corridor. Cap low, shoulders loose, every sense sharpened. The building above him looked normal. People answered calls, carried folders, complained about rain. Empires rarely looked evil from the inside. They looked efficient. In the underground parking garage, fluorescent lights hummed over rows of black cars polished like sealed secrets. James's old truck sat between 2 executive sedans, dented, dusty, stubbornly out of place. He was halfway across the concrete when his phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed buried with Daniel." James stopped. The garage seemed suddenly too quiet. At the far entrance, elevator doors opened. Olivia stepped out, coat damp from rain, face pale but determined. She saw him and began to move, quickly toward him. "Stop," James shouted. She froze. The world narrowed, to the truck, to the faint blinking under the chassis, to the smell he knew before thought, before language. Chemical, sharp, wrong. James turned toward Olivia, one hand raised, mouth forming her name. The explosion tore through the underground garage, before the sound had finished leaving his throat. Fire swallowed the truck in a brutal orange bloom, lifting metal, glass, and concrete dust into the air. The blast threw Olivia backward against a pillar. James disappeared behind a wall of flame and smoke, the evidence still hidden against his heart. For one suspended second, Olivia could not breathe. The blast had thrown dust through the garage in a thick, choking wave, and the air still rang with the aftershock of it, as if the building itself had been struck in the ribs. Her ears were full of a high, thin note that made everything else seem distant and unreal. The orange light had already collapsed into smoke, but the shape of the fire stayed, burned behind her eyes. One hand was braced against the pillar where the impact had driven her, the other trembling uselessly against her own side, as though she could hold her body together by force. Then she saw movement, not a body, not yet, just a shadow shifting beyond the blackened wreckage, low to the ground, stubbornly alive. "James," her voice came out broken. It did not sound like her own. She pushed forward before fear could think of reasons to stop her. There were fragments of glass beneath her shoes, and her heels slipped once on the wet concrete. But she did not care. Smoke burned her throat. Her coat had caught soot at the sleeve. Somewhere overhead, sprinklers stuttered to life and spat cold water into the fire, which only made the air thicker, meaner, harder to see through. She found him where the truck had been torn apart. James was on one knee beside the ruined frame, one hand planted hard on the floor, the other pressed against his side. Blood darkened the front of his shirt in spreading lines. His face was grey with pain, and there was a cut near his temple that ran into his hairline. But his eyes were open, alert, furious, almost alive. The sight of him alive shattered the last fragile thing holding Olivia together. She made a sound that was closer to grief than relief, and dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands already moving without permission, searching for the source of the blood, the worst injury, something she could fix if only she touched it fast enough. "Don't," he said hoarsely, catching her wrist. "Olivia, don't panic. I'm here." That should have been enough. The words were simple. The voice was steady enough to be believed. But the sight of his blood on her hands, the heat of the blast still rolling in the concrete beneath them, the horrible fact that she had almost watched him vanish inside fire, tore open something in her. She had spent years learning how to seal. Her composure, the polished surface she wore in boardrooms and family dinners and emergency briefings, cracked clean through. "Don't tell me not to panic." Her voice rose sharply, then broke. "You were standing right there." James tried to draw a breath and winced. "I know, you were standing right there." She grabbed his shirt with both hands now, not caring that her fingers were shaking too hard to be useful. There was soot on his jaw, blood on his sleeve, and beneath the pain he looked more like himself than she had expected him to, after the blast, which somehow made it worse. She had thought if he looked ruined she could prepare for it. Instead he looked stubbornly, impossibly alive, and the relief of that nearly undid her completely. His expression changed at the sight of her face. Olivia realized, with a strange, stunned humiliation, that she was crying, not elegantly, not silently. Tears were spilling before she could stop them. And for once she did not have the strength to shame herself for it. James's hand loosened on her wrist. His voice softened. "Hey, I'm here." "No." She swallowed hard and pressed both palms against his chest, as though she could feel his heartbeat through the fabric. "You don't get to say that like it's nothing." The garage around them had begun to fill with security alarms and shouted orders. Men in dark uniforms were running toward the wreckage. Someone was calling for medics. The entire world was turning into motion again, but Olivia could only see James. He shifted and swallowed another grimace. "We need to get out before whoever did this finishes the job." That at last made her body move. She helped him stand, though he was heavier than he looked, and he refused to lean on her until his knees betrayed him once, briefly, enough to make her furious. Together, they staggered, through the smoke and strobing emergency lights, toward the service exit, while alarms wailed above them, like a warning that had arrived too late. Olivia kept one arm around his waist, and one hand locked around his forearm. He was warm through the blood and soot, and every step he took looked like an argument with pain. By the time they reached the safe house, night had swallowed the city whole. It was one of Gabriel Reed's properties in name only, a discreet modern house hidden behind a privacy wall, in a quiet part of the waterfront district. From the outside, it looked like any other piece of expensive architecture meant to disappear into its surroundings. Inside, it had been prepared like a bunker: medical supplies, reinforced doors, blackout curtains, redundant locks, a silent generator. The kind of place Olivia had once dismissed as paranoid, until she became enough of a target to need it. James sat on the edge of the bathroom counter, while she cleaned the blood from the cut at his temple. He had taken the shirt off because the fabric had stuck too badly to the wound on his ribs, and Olivia had told herself the matter-of-factness of that act was the only thing keeping her hands from trembling again. Under the bright bathroom light, the bruise blooming across his side was already darkening. There were shrapnel burns near his shoulder, a shallow gash along his upper arm. He had been hit hard, but not fatally. The knowledge should have reassured her. Instead, it made her angry in a new, helpless way. "Sit still," she said. "I am sitting still. You're bleeding on the counter. Then the counter will survive." Despite herself, a strange breath of flour escaped her, fragile and disbelieving. He looked up at her, as if he had been waiting for that exact sound, and something in his face eased. There were no reporters, no board members, no family, no one to perform for. Only the sound of running water, the smell of antiseptic, and the two of them in a room too quiet to be comfortable. When she finished bandaging his side, she did not move away immediately. Her hands remained on his skin for 1 second longer than necessary. He noticed, of course he noticed. That was the problem with James Walker. He noticed everything that mattered and pretended not to. "You scared me," she said quietly. He held her gaze. "I know." "No," she said again, bitter now with the force of it. "You don't know. I don't scare easily." That was. She stopped, unable to find a polished word for the ruin in her chest. That was losing control. His expression shifted in that subtle, careful way he had when he was trying not to push too hard. "Olivia, don't," she murmured. "Not yet." So he didn't later, when the house had settled into the stillness of deep night. She found him awake in the darkened living room, wrapped in a blanket with his injured side carefully protected. The city lights leaked in through the curtains in thin lines, silvering the edges of his face. He looked older then, not by much, but enough to reveal the years that had been compressed into silence. She sat across from him, curled into the far end of the sofa in a way she would never permit in a conference room. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was no longer the cold professional distance it had been in the beginning. It had changed. It had weight now, the kind of weight that could become shelter or collapse depending on what they did with it. Eventually, James said, "The first time I knew I was going to die, I wasn't afraid." Olivia turned her head toward him. He stared at the dark window, speaking as though the glass might be easier to face than her eyes. "That was the mission Daniel died on. We were supposed to extract a source before a military contractor handed him over. It went wrong before we even reached the compound. Too clean, too prepared. Someone knew our route." His jaw tightened once, and she could tell it cost him something to continue. "Daniel was hit first. Not in the head, in the leg. He told me to keep moving. I didn't. I tried to get him out. And by the time I realized we were already surrounded, he was bleeding out in my arms." James's mouth pressed into a flat line. "I remember his hand on my vest. He asked if we'd made a mistake. That's what he asked. Not whether he was going to die. Whether it had all been a mistake." Olivia's chest ached with it. "I told him no," James went on. "I lied, because that's what you do when someone you care about is dying. You give them something soft to hold on to." Then he was gone and I came back and everyone called it survival. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost not. "I thought surviving meant I owed the world. Something I thought, if I made myself small enough, useful enough, quiet enough, maybe the guilt would stop following me around." Olivia watched him in the dim light, and for the first time she understood that his silence had never been emptiness. It had been penance. She drew her knees up beneath her, suddenly aware of the distance she had spent her life pretending not to feel from everyone around her. "I know that kind of fear." He looked at her then, fully. "I inherited a company, a name, an empire," she said. Her voice was steady only because she had gone beyond the point of pretending. "People think wealth means freedom. Sometimes it just means everyone comes to you with a beautiful face and a sharp knife. If they want power, they smile. If they want loyalty, they ask for trust. If they want to take something, they call it family." James said nothing, but his attention was complete. "My father taught me to be careful because people would mistake compassion for weakness. My aunt taught me to be careful because compassion would make me easy to manipulate. My cousin taught me to be careful because the people closest to me might not want me alive at all." She gave a faint, tired shake of her head. "So I learned to lead without being held, to trust no one too much, to make myself untouchable and then wonder why I still felt terrified. For a while there was only the hum of the house. Then James said quietly, 'You're not untouchable.' The words were so simple that they struck harder than comfort should have. She gave him a look that was half weary, half vulnerable. "No, apparently not." A small smile touched his mouth, then faded. "That bothers you. It terrifies me." He studied her as if weighing whether honesty would be a kindness or a wound. "Being close to me might make that worse." Olivia almost asked him if he was trying to push her away for her own good. Instead, she understood the real fear beneath it. He thought he was danger. He thought his life had already taught him what happened to people who stayed near him long enough to matter. She moved then, crossing the space between the chairs, and sitting beside him on the sofa. Not touching him at first, just close enough to make the air between them feel different. "I don't need a perfectly safe life," she said softly. "I need something real." His gaze lowered to her hand, resting on the cushion between them, close enough to touch but not demanding it. "Real things get broken, so do lonely ones," she replied. That finally made him look at her fully, and in his eyes she saw the same thing she had been trying to hide in herself all evening. The dangerous hope that maybe neither of them had to keep living like a fortress. He lifted one hand as if to touch her cheek, then stopped himself halfway and let it fall back into his lap. The restraint in that small motion was more intimate than any kiss, more devastating too. Olivia understood then why people built their lives around caution. Because wanting someone could feel exactly like standing at the edge of a cliff, and discovering the fall was beautiful. He spoke first, almost roughly. "I can't be the thing that ruins you, and I can't keep pretending I don't want you here." The silence after that was deep and alive. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the night held them still. At some point she slept, or nearly slept, against the far arm of the sofa while James remained awake beside her, guarding the room with the stillness of someone who had spent too much of his life listening for the next threat. In the thin hours before dawn, Olivia woke once and found him watching her with an expression she could not name, something soft and pained and careful all at once. He looked away the moment she stirred. By morning, he had already built the distance back between them with almost insulting efficiency. Olivia hated him for it, which was another word for understanding him. When she finally returned to the apartment to retrieve the anonymous package recovered from the garage, it sat waiting on the table like a thing with no patience. She cut through the outer wrapping with a knife and found, tucked inside layers of protective foam, a small object wrapped in black cloth, a dog tag. The metal was worn at the edges, scratched by time, but the name was still visible, Daniel Price. Olivia stared at it without moving. Beneath it lay a folded slip of paper. On it were only coordinates, printed in clean, impersonal black ink, leading to an abandoned Aegis facility outside the city. For a long moment, she could only hear her own heartbeat. Then she closed her fingers around Daniel's dog tag, and the cold metal bit into her palm like a warning. The coordinates led them away from the glass towers and disciplined lights of the city, past the last curve of suburban wealth, into a stretch of road where winter bare trees leaned over the asphalt like witnesses unwilling to speak. Olivia sat in the passenger seat of James's old truck with Daniel Price's dog tag wrapped in a handkerchief inside her coat pocket. She had not wanted to bring it, but leaving it behind had felt worse, almost like abandoning a man who had spent years waiting for someone to listen. James drove in silence. It was not the cold silence he had worn that morning, built out of fear and discipline. This silence had weight. He had looked at the dog tag only once, and for a moment, Olivia had seen something inside him break so quietly that she almost wished he had shouted instead. Daniel had not been just a name in a military file, not just the dead friend James carried like an old wound. He had been real enough to leave metal behind, real enough to have been hunted, real enough to have sent them here. The abandoned Aegis facility appeared after a bend in the road, half swallowed by fog and overgrowth. It had once been designed to disappear in plain sight. Low concrete structure, mirrored panels gone dull with dust, a perimeter fence hidden behind pines, no corporate logo, no sign, only the faint geometry of money and secrecy. Olivia had seen dozens of Aegis Horizon sites across the world, polished command centers, pristine training compounds, elegant offices where danger was turned into service contracts. This place was different. It felt like the room under the house, where a family hid what it could not afford to bury. James stopped the truck beneath a cluster of trees a distance away from the main gate. "No lights," he said. I know, he looked at her then, briefly. I'm not saying it because I think you don't. There were 100 things inside that sentence. Care disguised as instruction. Fear disguised as caution. Olivia nodded and reached into her bag. For the compact tablet Gabriel had arranged for her, unregistered, stripped of corporate tracking, loaded with access tools that belonged more to the past than the present. The gate's electronic lock should have been dead. It was not. That alone told her the facility had never truly been abandoned. James noticed her expression, still breathing. Quietly, Olivia said, like a lie. They did not enter through the gate. James led her along the perimeter until they found a drainage access half hidden under dead leaves. He moved with a fluency that made the darkness seem less complete. Olivia followed, crouching low, her coat catching on wire and branches. A year ago, she would have called a security team, ordered a sweep, demanded aerial imaging. Tonight she crawled through wet earth beside a former soldier who trusted shadows more than boardrooms. Inside, the air tasted stale, metallic and cold. The corridor beyond the drainage access opened into a maintenance passage. Emergency lights glowed faint red at floor level, not enough to guide an ordinary person, but enough to suggest that someone, somewhere, still expected this place to function. Olivia's breath clouded in front of her face. James raised 2 fingers. Wait, he listened. At first she heard nothing except the hum of old wiring. Then, distant and soft, a mechanical click. Cameras, she whispered, not old ones. His jaw tightened. They moved slowly through the passage, avoiding the wider halls when possible. The building had been stripped of obvious equipment, but not of purpose. Cable trays ran along ceilings. Server racks sat behind glass in sealed rooms, some empty, some still blinking with faint green light. Offices had been cleared too neatly. No scattered paper, no broken chairs, no signs of hurried abandonment. It had been cleaned, prepared, preserved. Olivia felt unease gather beneath her ribs. This was not a dead project, this was a sleeping animal. They reached an interior archive behind a biometric panel. The scanner lit up when Olivia approached, and for one foolish second her heart leapt at the recognition. Then the display blinked heart. Olivia, access limited. Limited in a facility owned by her company, in a system built under her family's name. A bitter little laugh almost escaped her. James looked at the panel. Can you get through? I own the corporation, she said, her voice too soft. Apparently not the truth. She connected the tablet. Gabriel's old legal access codes did not open the door at first. Neither did her executive override. It was only when she entered a sequence. Gabriel had insisted she memorize the emergency authority once assigned to her father's office, that the lock released with a reluctant hiss. For a moment neither of them moved. Her father's authority still opened doors hers could not. The archive lights flickered on row by row. Inside were servers, physical files, and secure drives stored in climate-controlled cabinets. Olivia knew enough to understand that this was not merely a backup site. It was a vault, a place for records someone wanted available but unseen, deniable but not destroyed. James stayed near the door while she worked. His posture remained alert, but his eyes kept returning to the rows of labeled storage. Black Lantern appeared again and again, not as a failed pilot, not as a discontinued government partnership. The files described it with clinical pride. Predictive threat mapping, private signal interception, behavioral leverage modeling, targeted asset disruption. Words polished clean of blood. A privatized intelligence weapon. Olivia read the first report with a numbness that did not last. The third, her hands were shaking. Black Lantern had not ended after military review. It had been transferred through shell companies, obscured under research grants, consulting subsidiaries, offshore security analytics firms. Every time oversight closed in, the program changed names. Every time someone objected, the paper trail bent away from the people making decisions. And at the center of the official approvals, stamped again and again, was her father's name, Richard Hart. Her vision blurred. "No," she whispered. James turned from the door. "Olivia." She forced herself to keep reading. There was more. There had to be more. Gabriel had warned her that truth rarely arrived cleanly. It came tangled with the lies built to survive it. Minutes stretched thin as she opened sealed correspondence, authorization chains, scanned memos. Then she found it, a restricted internal letter, marked for council review, dated 3 months before her father's death. Richard Hart's signature was at the bottom, but not authorizing expansion, demanding termination. Black Lantern represents an unacceptable breach of legal, ethical, and national boundaries. Any continuation under private ownership constitutes an act of treason against public trust and a direct violation of Aegis Horizon's founding principles. I am ordering full shutdown, external disclosure, and preservation of evidence. Olivia stopped breathing. Below it were comments from the family council. Eleanor Hart's language was elegant, controlled, and lethal. Richard is compromised by sentiment. Immediate disclosure would destroy the company and the Hart legacy. Victor's note was shorter. Contain him. The room seemed to tilt. Olivia gripped the edge of the console. All her life, her father's reputation had been a shadow cast over every room she entered. Some had called him visionary, some ruthless, some morally ambitious until ambition swallowed him. After his death, whispers had hardened around his name. Black Lantern, failed oversight, dangerous idealism. Olivia had inherited not only his company but his suspicion. And now, beneath layers of dust and encryption, he had left behind proof that he had tried to stop the very crime used to stain him. "My father didn't build the monster," she said, though the words came out broken. "He tried to kill it." Came closer. There was no triumph in his face, no relief, only grief recognizing grief. Olivia looked up at him. "Your unit, Daniel the Ambush. Keep going," James said, but his voice was rough. She searched the archive. Daniel Price's name. For several seconds, nothing appeared. Then a restricted folder opened, not under casualty records, but under internal threat management. Daniel Price had been flagged as a courier. Attached were intercepted communications between Daniel and a secure legal contact, Richard Hart's private office. Daniel had obtained field evidence that Black Lantern was being deployed through private contractors in an active conflict zone. Names, payments, coordinates, command interference. He had been carrying proof. James stood very still behind her. A mission log appeared. Ambush probability manipulated. Extraction route compromised. Friendly support delayed due to conflicting intelligence. Olivia covered her mouth. She did not need the file to state what had happened. The report was merciless because it did not bother to sound cruel. Daniel Price had not walked into bad luck. He had walked into a trap arranged to retrieve or destroy what he carried. James reached past her and touched the screen with 2 fingers, as if touching Daniel's name through glass. For the first time since she had known him, his strength looked unbearably tired. "He told me something was wrong," James said. His voice was low, almost distant. "The night before he said if anything happened, I had to remember he wasn't paranoid." A pause. "I told him to sleep." Olivia's heart twisted. "James, I told him we had a long day coming and he needed rest." His hand curled into a fist against the console. "He was asking me to hear him, and I treated it like fear." No, Olivia turned fully toward him. "He trusted you enough to say it. That isn't failure." "He died carrying proof," James said. "And I lived carrying guilt because they needed someone to believe it was just war." The words entered her like cold water. They not fate, not chaos, not one bad mission in a violent world. People with names, people who attended memorials, sat on boards, wore black to funerals, and spoke about sacrifice while feeding men into machinery. Olivia took Daniel's dog tag from her pocket and unfolded the handkerchief. The metal lay in her palm between them. My family used my father's name as a shield, she said. They used your friend's death as silence. They used the company I run as a weapon. James looked at her then, and she saw the danger she had feared. Not that this truth would make him hate her, but that it would give him permission to disappear into vengeance. Instead, he closed her fingers gently around the dog tag. Not your family, he said. The correction was quiet, but it struck deeper than any comfort. Olivia's throat tightened. I am a Hart. You are Olivia. His gaze held hers. There's a difference. I didn't know that when I met you. The warmth of those words almost broke her, more than the files had, because he was not forgiving her for crimes she had not committed. He was refusing to let blood define guilt. In a world where everyone had tried to purchase loyalty, blame, inherit power, or disguise cruelty as legacy, James offered her something terrifyingly simple. He saw her. Not the name, not the fortune, not the chair at the head of the table, her. For one breath, the abandoned facility, the old servers, the dead men and living traitors all seemed to fall away. There were only two people standing inside the truth, both wounded by it, both still standing. Then Olivia heard it, a soft click, overhead. James heard it at the same her arm. We need to leave. On the console, the status light that had been green shifted to amber. Olivia's blood chilled. Silent alarm, not silent anymore if we stay. She moved fast, copying files on the encrypted drive Gabriel had provided. Progress crawled across the screen with maddening calm. James went to the door, looked out, then returned. Olivia, we may not have 30. This is everything, she said, forcing her voice steady. My father, Daniel, Eleanor, Victor, the shell companies. If we leave without it, we leave alive, or none of it matters. The drive finished at 98%, then paused. Olivia stared at it, willing the machine to obey. Somewhere deep in the facility, ventilation shifted on. A system waking. Doors that had remained open began to seal one by one down the corridor with heavy metallic thuds. 99. James cursed softly, complete. Olivia yanked the drive free just as the archive lights flashed red. They ran. James led her through a different passage than the one they had used to enter. Behind them, locks engaged, one after another, as if the building itself were trying to swallow the evidence back into its walls. Olivia's lungs burned. Her shoulder struck a doorframe. James caught her before she fell, steadying her without slowing. This way, the emergency exit. Stairwell smelled of rust and damp concrete. At the top, the door resisted. James slammed his shoulder into it once, twice. On the third impact, it burst open into the night. Cold air hit Olivia's face. For one wild second, freedom seemed possible. They emerged behind the facility near the service road, the trees ahead dark and close. James pulled her toward the truck's direction, his body angled instinctively between her and the open ground. Then floodlights snapped on. White light carved the night apart. Olivia stopped so abruptly that James's hand tightened around hers. Several black vehicles were parked beyond the gate that should have been deserted. Armed men stood in a clean formation near the access road. Not police, not official security, but private contractors dressed in tactical black. At their center stood Victor Hart, immaculate in a dark coat, his expression calm enough to be mistaken for sadness by anyone who did not know him. Beside him, pale and rigid under the floodlights, stood Mia Chen. Olivia felt the encrypted drive burn like fire in her coat pocket. Her heart did not break all at once, it fell, piece by piece, as Mia lifted her eyes and looked at her, with an apology she was not allowed to speak. For a moment, Olivia could not hear the engines, the wind, or the faint electronic hum of the floodlights. She heard only the soft click of memory. Mia placing a cup of black coffee on her desk at 6:30 every morning without being asked. Mia quietly changing Olivia's schedule after her father's memorial days, because she knew Olivia would never admit she could not breathe in boardrooms full of condolences. Mia standing beside her through hostile acquisitions, Charity galas, investor calls, family dinners that felt like interrogations. Mia had known the rhythm of her life so closely that Olivia had once thought trust could be measured in small, repeated acts. Now Mia stood beside Victor beneath a white, merciless light, her hands clasped in front of her, as if she were waiting to take minutes at a meeting. James moved first. His hand slid from Olivia's wrist to her shoulder, pushing her gently behind him. It was a protective movement, almost automatic, but Olivia felt the tremor underneath it. He had counted the men. He had measured the distance to the trees. He had probably already understood that there were too many guns, too much open ground, too little cover. "Stay behind me," he said under his breath. Victor smiled as if James had made a charming but irrelevant suggestion. "Mr. Walker," he called. "I was told former soldiers were trained to assess impossible odds." James did not answer. Olivia forced herself to step out from behind him. If she hid now, Victor would enjoy it too much. "You knew we would come here," she said. Victor's eyes moved to her coat pocket. "You always had a weakness for following ghosts." A cold weight settled in her stomach. He knew about the drive. Maybe not its contents, not yet, but enough. The old facility, Black Lantern, her father's buried trail. Victor had anticipated all of it. Every locked door they had opened tonight might have been a corridor he had allowed them to enter. Olivia looked at Mia again. Her voice almost failed her. "Mia." The name came out smaller than she intended. Mia flinched. It was barely visible, a tiny break in her controlled expression. But Olivia saw it because she had spent years reading that face across conference tables and glass office walls. Pain flashed there, then disappeared under obedience. "I'm sorry, Miss Hart," Mia said. The formality hurt more than an insult. Victor sighed, almost theatrically. "Please don't make this sentimental. Miss Chen has simply chosen the future of Aegis Horizon over your increasingly reckless judgment." James took half a step forward. 3 rifles lifted. Olivia caught his sleeve. "Don't." He stopped, but every muscle in his body remained drawn tight as wire. Victor walked them slowly, unhurried, the way powerful men moved when they had arranged the world to make speed unnecessary. Snow or ash drifted through the beam of the floodlights, silver and weightless. Behind him, the facility loomed in darkness, a grave that had opened just enough to swallow them again. "You stole company property," Victor said, "broke into a restricted site, assaulted security personnel, conspired with a mentally unstable former contractor who has a documented history of violence." James gave a short laugh without humor. "You mean me, I mean both of you in different ways." Victor's gaze returned to Olivia. "But I'm not unreasonable. Family should be given the opportunity to resolve matters privately." "Family," Olivia repeated. The word tasted like iron. "You sent men to kill us. I sent men to contain a crisis. You revived Black Lantern." His expression did not change, but something darkened behind his eyes. Careful, there it was, not denial, not surprise. Olivia felt James shift beside her, felt the heat of his anger, restrained only because her life stood between him and his rage. Victor raised one hand. One of his men approached carrying a slim tablet and a black folder. The kind of folder Olivia had signed 1,000 times, transferring shares, approving contracts, authorizing operations across continents. Paper had always seemed delicate to her. Tonight, she understood how paper could become a blade. "I need you to sign an emergency voting proxy," Victor said. "Temporary transfer of executive control and board voting authority to the family trust. Represented by me pending medical review." Olivia stared at him. "You can't force me to sign that." "No," Victor agreed softly. "But I can force you to choose." 2 men seized James from behind. It happened fast. James twisted, slammed one elbow back, and one contractor stumbled with a grunt. Another gun came up. Too close to Olivia's chest, she froze. James saw it and stopped fighting. That was what broke her. Not the guns, not Victor's documents, not Mia's apparent betrayal. James stopped because the barrel was pointed at her. The men forced him to his knees on the wet gravel. One pressed a weapon to the back of his head. James remained upright despite it, breathing hard, his eyes fixed on Olivia with a fierce refusal that made her want to scream. "Don't," he said. Victor looked almost pleased. "He is very loyal. I understand the appeal." Olivia could barely feel her fingers. "Let him go, sign." No, the gun at James' head clicked. Olivia's entire world narrowed to that small metallic sound. James's voice cut through the night, rough and urgent. "Olivia, listen to me. That's not just money, that's access. Contracts, people. If he controls Aegis, he controls everything. Your father tried to stop." "I know," she whispered. "Then don't." His eyes burned into hers. "I'm not worth that." The cruelty of those words struck her harder than any weapon. After all this time, after all his quiet courage, after the way he stood between her and every danger as if his life had less weight than hers, he still did not understand. She took one step toward him. The men stiffened, but Victor raised a hand to allow it. Olivia crouched enough to meet James's gaze. The gravel cut into the fine fabric of her trousers. She did not care. "You don't get to decide what your life is worth to me," she said. His expression changed, not softening exactly, but cracking open in a way she had never seen. Fear entered it then, not fear of death, but fear of being chosen. Olivia, she stood before he could say anything else. If she looked at him longer, she would lose the strength to move. Victor offered the tablet. Her hand shook when she took the stylus. Every lesson she had ever learned about power rose against her. Never surrender control. Never let emotion determine corporate action. Never allow an enemy to define the board. Her father's voice, Gabriel's warnings, every shareholder's expectation, every employee who depended on Aegis Horizon, thousands of lives bound to the signature she was about to give away. But behind her, James knelt with a gun against his skull, and Olivia Hart, who had been taught to guard an empire before she was taught to be loved, signed her name. The digital ink appeared cleanly on the screen. Olivia Hart. Victor accepted the tablet with reverence, as if she had handed him a crown. For one heartbeat, silence held them all. Then he laughed softly. "There she is," he said. "The tragic flaw of my brilliant cousin. You were never unfit because you lacked intelligence. You were unfit because you could be moved." Olivia lifted her chin, though something inside her had gone numb. "If power requires me to watch an innocent man die to prove I deserve it, then your definition of leadership is already rotten." Victor's smile thinned, spoken like someone who has just lost. He nodded. The gun was removed from James's head, but the men kept hold of him. Olivia exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes. Mia approached to witness the final transfer, her face pale under the floodlights. She held another authentication device, one Olivia recognized from executive emergency protocols. Her hands were steady, but when she came close enough to James, her sleeve brushed his shoulder. It was nothing, a simple accidental movement. Only James's eyes shifted for less than a second. Olivia might have missed it if her heart had not been searching desperately for any sign that the woman she had trusted for years had not vanished entirely. Mia did not look at Olivia. She kept her gaze lowered, her voice professional as she confirmed the transaction. Emergency proxy recorded. Control transfer accepted by secure ledger. Victor turned away to speak with one of his men. In that narrow moment, James's fingers curled slightly near his cuff. Something small and flat disappeared into his palm. A card. Olivia saw only the edge of it, matte grey with a faint blue stripe. Not one of Victor's standard access credentials. Not Aegis issue either. A coded service card, old infrastructure. Maybe the facility's maintenance tunnels. Mia stepped back. Her lips barely moved. Southgate, 7 minutes. Olivia's breath caught. James did not react. That was how Olivia knew he had heard her. The world rearranged itself around that whisper. Mia had not been standing beside Victor as an ally. She had been standing there as someone trapped close enough to steal keys from a cage. Victor faced Olivia again, satisfied and cruel. "Take them to Vehicle 3. Mr. Walker can be dropped somewhere unpleasant but survivable. Olivia will come with me. A doctor is waiting to evaluate her condition." James suddenly went limp. The contractor holding him adjusted instinctively under the unexpected weight. James moved like a released spring. His head slammed backward into one man's face. His hand struck the wrist of the second, twisting the weapon away. At the same instant, the floodlights died. Darkness crashed over the service road. Someone shouted. A shot cracked into the night, wild and too high. Olivia felt James's hand close around hers with absolute certainty. Run. This time she did. They plunged toward the side road. Not the trees. James moved by memory or instinct, pulling her through the chaos as men shouted conflicting orders behind them. A vehicle alarm blared. The black shapes of contractors stumbled in the sudden blindness, their night vision ruined by the floodlights' collapse. Mia had done that too, Olivia realized. 7 minutes. Southgate, lights down. Her betrayal had been a mask painted over terror. They reached a low service barrier. James swiped the coded card across a panel, half hidden by ivy. For one awful second nothing happened. Then the lock released with a dull, mechanical clunk. James shoved the gate open and pushed Olivia through. Through first, they ran down a narrow maintenance path sloping away from the facility. Branches clawed at Olivia's coat. Her lungs burned. Behind them, Victor's voice rose above the confusion, no longer calm. "Find them." James did not slow until the facility lights were distant smears through the trees. At last they ducked behind an abandoned utility shed near the outer road. Olivia bent forward, hands on her knees, shaking so violently she could barely stand. James checked the card, then the road, then her. Only when he was sure no one had followed did his composure fracture. "What the hell were you thinking?" he demanded, voice low but raw. "You signed away your company." Olivia looked up at him. In the moonlight there was blood at the corner of his mouth, a bruise already darkening along his cheekbone, alive, angry. "Breathing. I was thinking I couldn't watch you die." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have had to choose." "But I did." The words hung between them, simple and unbearable. He looked away first, dragging a hand over his face. When he turned back, the anger had thinned into something more painful. "I told you not to save me like that, and I told you," she said, her voice trembling now. "You don't get to decide what you're worth." For a moment neither of them spoke. The night around them was cold and full of sirens in the distance. Olivia pressed her hand over the pocket where the encrypted drive still rested. Victor had the throne, but not the truth. Not yet. James noticed the movement. "You still have it?" She nodded. A faint, grim relief crossed his face. "Then we're not finished." Olivia thought of lowered eyes, her tiny whisper the card in James's palm. "Mia helped us." She did. Victor must have something on her. James's expression hardened. "We'll find out." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. The ache of betrayal had not disappeared, but it had changed shape, loyalty. She was beginning to understand. Did not always arrive clean and shining. Sometimes it wore fear. Sometimes it stood beside the enemy long enough to open a door. A phone vibrated, not hers. James pulled a stolen contractor phone from his jacket, likely taken during the struggle. Its screen lit with an incoming broadcast notification from Aegis Horizon's internal crisis channel. Olivia read it over his shoulder. Her blood went cold. Victor Hart, Acting Emergency Executive Authority of Aegis Horizon, would address global media and shareholders within 24 hours regarding Olivia Hart's psychological instability, unlawful conduct, and temporary removal from leadership pending formal board ratification. Beneath it was a scheduled time, a countdown. James looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same truth settle. Victor had not only taken her company, by tomorrow he intended to take her name. The countdown did not move faster than any other clock. And yet Olivia felt each minute scrape across her skin. For years, she had been trained to survive hostile rooms. Boardrooms full of men twice her age who smiled while calculating the price of her failure. Charity galas where old money whispered that her father had built an empire too large for a daughter to inherit. Congressional hearings, shareholder revolts, acquisition wars. She knew how to stand still beneath scrutiny. She knew how to become marble, but this was different. This time the knife carried her family name. Victor would not simply accuse her of incompetence. He would wrap his betrayal in concern, speak of her instability with a grieving cousin's eyes, and the world would believe him, because it was easier to believe a powerful woman had become irrational than to believe an entire legacy had been rotting quietly beneath polished floors. Olivia sat in the back of the unmarked van. While the city slid past in silver and black, her reflection trembled in the window, pale but dry-eyed. James drove without speaking. Mia sat beside her, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had lost color. A woman trapped between guilt and courage. On the floor between them lay the hard drive Mia had smuggled out, wrapped in an old scarf as if it were something wounded. A few hours ago, Olivia had thought she had lost everything. Her company, her staff, her family, perhaps even the right to defend herself. Now she understood there was still one thing Victor had not taken. Her voice. James glanced at her through the mirror. "We don't go to your penthouse. We don't go to any property under your name. He'll have every camera watching. I know a place," Mia said quietly. Olivia turned to her. Mia swallowed. "Mr. Reed's office, not the downtown one. The old archive house in Queens. Your father used it before Aegis moved everything into corporate storage." At the mention of her father, Olivia's chest tightened. Gabriel Reed had once been the only person in her father's circle who did not treat her like a decorative heir. When Olivia was 16 and furious at a dinner where investors ignored her questions, Gabriel had handed her a legal brief the next morning and said, "If they refuse to answer you, learn enough to make them afraid not to." He had not called her princess. He had not told her to be patient. He had taught her where power hid its fingerprints. James changed lanes. "Can we trust him?" Olivia looked down at the hard drive. "With my life, I don't know anymore." The answer hurt more than it should have. Trust had become a room full of broken glass. Every step required blood. "But with the truth," she continued. "Yes." The archive house stood between a closed bakery and an old tailor shop, its brick face dark with rain and age. No sign announced its purpose. No corporate emblem marked the door. It looked like a place the city had forgotten on purpose. Gabriel Reed opened the door before they knocked. He was thinner than Olivia remembered. Silver hair combed neatly back, sleeves rolled at the wrists as if he had been expecting a long night. His gaze moved from Olivia to James, then to Mia, and finally to the scarf-wrapped drive in her hands. The grief in his face was immediate and carefully controlled. "So," Gabriel said, stepping aside, "your aunt has stopped pretending." The warmth of the old archive house nearly broke Olivia. Books lined the walls. Paper files sat in numbered cabinets. Lamps threw amber circles across worn wooden tables. It smelled of dust, ink, and the kind of patience that had almost disappeared from her world. For one suspended second, she remembered being 21, standing in this room after her father's funeral, refusing to cry while Gabriel told her the board would test her within the year. They had tested her. They had never stopped. Mia placed the drive on the table. "Victor had me copy fragments from a restricted Black Lantern directory. Not all of it. Enough to prove the program was reactivated. Enough to prove forged authorizations. And," her voice faltered, "enough to show Daniel Price was not collateral damage. He was targeted after contact with your father." James went still. There were silences that were empty, and silences that became weapons. Olivia watched his hand curl once, not into rage but around restraint. She knew that name lived inside him like an unhealed fracture. Daniel Price was not a file to him, not evidence, not a casualty figure. He was a laugh remembered at the wrong moment, a voice that no longer answered, a debt James had carried into every quiet morning since. Gabriel took the drive and connected it to an isolated terminal. If this is real, Victor will move before dawn. He already has, Olivia said. He's scheduled a media address tomorrow. He's calling me unstable and unlawful. Temporary removal pending board ratification. Gabriel's eyes hardened. Classic seizure through reputational collapse. Make the leader appear compromised, then present the coup as rescue. James came to stand beside Olivia, not in front of her. Beside her she noticed the difference, and something in her tired heart softened painfully. "Can you authenticate it?" James asked. Gabriel nodded toward a locked cabinet. "Maybe more than that." He crossed the room, entered a code, and withdrew a small black case. Inside lay an old data wafer, 2 sealed envelopes, and a recorder no larger than a matchbox. Olivia's breath caught. "What is that?" Gabriel did not answer immediately. He placed the recorder on the table as though setting down a ghost. "Your father's final testimony." The room seemed to tilt. Olivia stared at the device for years. Her father's death had been a wall. Sudden, official, closed, a heart attack, the report had said, though he had been healthy, disciplined, too stubborn even for illness. She had mourned him as a daughter, then inherited him as a controversy. Every scandal attached to Black Lantern had carried his shadow. Every accusation had whispered that he had built something monstrous and left her to polish its name. "He recorded it 2 days before he died," Gabriel said. "He came here because he believed the internal channels were compromised. He named Black Lantern. He named falsified military contracts. He did not yet have proof of Eleanor's role, but he suspected Victor had access beyond his rank." Olivia reached for the edge of the table. James's hand hovered, then settled lightly against her back. Not claiming, not restraining, simply there. "Why didn't you give it to me?" she asked, and the softness in her voice was more dangerous than anger. Gabriel accepted the question like a sentence he had been waiting years to hear. "Because he made me swear not to release it unless 2 conditions were met. First, that Black Lantern resurfaced. Second, that you were strong enough to survive what it would do to the family." A humorless laugh escaped her. "You decided that for me?" "No," Gabriel said. "I failed you by waiting too long." The admission was quiet. It did not erase the wound, but it kept it from becoming another lie. James looked at Olivia. "Your call." That, more than anything, steadied her. All her life, people had made decisions around her in the name of protecting her, controlling her, preserving the company, preserving the family, preserving the image. James did not ask if she was fragile. He did not assume she would break. He offered her the weight of choice and trusted her hands not to drop it. Olivia picked up the recorder. "Play it." Her father's voice filled the room with a familiar gravity that nearly brought her to her knees. "If this record is being heard, then I failed to stop what our name allowed to grow." He sounded tired, older than she remembered. But beneath the fatigue was the same stern gentleness that had once corrected her posture before interviews and secretly bought her street noodles afterward, because she hated banquet food. Black Lantern was authorized as a defensive intelligence prototype. It has been altered into something I no longer recognize: unauthorized surveillance, off-book targeting, military asset manipulation. I have begun the process of termination, but I believe members of my own family and executive circle are obstructing me. Olivia, if this reaches you, do not defend my reputation at the cost of truth. No legacy is worth innocent blood. Olivia pressed a fist to her mouth. The recorder continued. "There is a soldier, Daniel Price. He contacted me through an encrypted channel regarding operational anomalies tied to a convoy route. If anything happens to him, it is not an accident. If anything happens to me, do not let them bury this under my name." James turned away. For one moment, he was no longer the controlled former soldier who read exits before entering rooms, no longer the man who could disarm an attacker with brutal economy. He was someone standing at the edge of a grave that had just opened again. Olivia went to him. She did not say Daniel's death was not his fault. She had learned that guilt did not surrender just because truth knocked on the door. Instead, she stood close enough that her shoulder touched his arm. James shut his eyes. He tried to stop it. Yes, Olivia whispered. And so did my father. The truth did not heal them. Not yet. But it changed the shape of their pain. It connected two losses that had been kept apart by lies, and in that connection something fierce began to rise. By dawn, the archive house had become a war room. Gabriel worked through authentication protocols, comparing metadata, encryption signatures, old legal seals, and chain of custody fragments that only a man who had spent half his life anticipating betrayal would have preserved. Maya mapped Victor's media strategy, pulling up internal memos she had memorized when she could not safely copy them. Olivia stood at the center of the table, watching the empire built in her name fracture into evidence, motive, and risk. James took charge of the living. He contacted the few remaining loyal security staff through back channels he built faster than most executives built statements. Not the senior officers who owed their bonuses to Victor, not the polished men who posed beside armored vehicles in annual reports. He chose dispatchers, field analysts, former guards moved off promotion tracks for refusing unethical orders, a communications tech whose sister Olivia's foundation had helped during a medical crisis, two drivers who had once served under James's old commander. By mid-morning, 7 people had arrived at the archive house. None wore suits expensive enough for a Hart press conference. None looked like the sort of people Victor would consider important. James briefed them in the back room. "This isn't about saving a CO," he said. "It's about keeping a public event from becoming a controlled trap. No heroics, no chasing glory. You watch exits, feeds, credentials, and each other. If something feels staged, it probably is." Olivia listened from the doorway. There was no performance in him, no need to dominate the room. He spoke plainly, and people leaned in because he made responsibility feel honorable instead of disposable. A strange ache opened in her. She had paid thousands of employees across continents. She had signed contracts worth billions to move teams into war zones and extraction corridors. Yet watching James teach 7 frightened loyalists how to stand together, she understood something she had somehow missed inside all that scale. Loyalty could not be purchased, it could only be answered. When the room emptied, Olivia remained. James was checking a venue map on a crack tablet. He had not slept. A bruise darkened his jaw from the fight the night before, and there was dried blood at the edge of one sleeve he had not bothered to mention. "You're bleeding," she said. He glanced down as if the body were an inconvenience. "Not much." That wasn't reassurance. It wasn't meant to be poetry. Despite herself, she almost smiled. Then the smile vanished under the weight of what she needed to say. "James." He looked up. The room held around them, quiet except for rain tapping against the old windows and the low murmur of Gabriel speaking on an encrypted line outside. Olivia walked to him slowly. "Tonight, tomorrow, whenever this becomes dangerous, I need you to promise me something." His expression changed. He already knew. "No," he said, "you haven't heard it." "I have." Her throat tightened. "Don't die for me." The words came out steadier than she felt. They had been living inside her since the first time he stepped between her and a bullet, without hesitation, since she realized his instinct to protect was braided too tightly with his belief that his own life was expendable. James set the tablet down. "Olivia, no." She shook her head once. "I am not asking you to abandon me. I'm asking you not to turn love into another battlefield where you prove you deserve to survive." His face went pale in a way no wound had made it. She stepped closer because if she stopped now, fear would win. Daniel died, your men died, you lived. That is not a debt you repay by offering yourself to the next bullet. If you stand with me alive. For a long moment he said nothing. Then James looked at her with an expression so unguarded, it felt like dawn breaking over ruins. I spent years thinking the best thing I could do was make my death useful, he said quietly. Then you came along, arrogant as hell. Impossible to protect because you keep walking toward fires in designer heels. A tear slipped down before she could stop it. His voice roughened. And somehow, for the first time in years, I started making plans that went past tomorrow. Olivia breathed in, but it trembled. I don't know how to do this perfectly, he said. I don't know how to love someone without wanting to put myself between her and everything sharp. But I'm learning. He reached for her hand, his thumb warm against her cold fingers. Not to die for you, to live because of you, with you if you'll have me after all this. The tenderness of it hurt more than any confession shouted beneath chandeliers could have. It was not polished. It did not ask the world to approve. It simply stood there, honest and scarred, offering itself. Olivia pressed her forehead against his chest. I'll have you before, during and after, she whispered, but especially after. His arms came around her carefully at first, then fully, as if he too was choosing not restraint but belief. For a brief minute, the conspiracy, the company, the family name, all of it receded. There was only the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, stubborn proof of life. By evening, Olivia had made her decision. Victor expected her to hide, to release statements through lawyers, to appear defensive and diminished on some remote feed. He expected marble. He expected armor. Instead, she would stand in the main atrium of Aegis Horizon, beneath the glass walls, where her father's name had been carved into the founding plaque, and speak as herself, not as an untouchable billionaire, not as the perfect daughter of a perfect legacy, as a woman betrayed by her own blood, holding proof that power, conscience was, only violence wearing a better suit. Gabriel warned her that open confrontation carried risk. Mia warned her Victor would try to paint emotion as instability. James warned her the venue could not be fully secured. Olivia listened to all of them. Then she said, I spent too long using power as armor. It protected me from insults, from doubt, from grief. But armor also keeps out the people trying to reach you. She looked at the recorder, at her father's final testimony, at James standing beside the map of every possible danger. Tomorrow I use it as truth. No one argued after that. The next day arrived cold and bright. By noon the media had gathered outside Aegis Horizon's headquarters, drawn by scandal, bloodline drama, and the promise of a billionaire's public collapse. Helicopters circled. Commentators speculated. Stock tickers trembled. Victor's announcement had been delayed by exactly 17 minutes after Olivia's legal team, guided by Gabriel, filed an emergency notice of evidentiary disclosure and demanded equal access to the scheduled broadcast. It was a small victory. Small victories, Olivia had learned, were often the ones that kept you breathing long enough for the larger ones. In a secure preparation room, 2 floors below the atrium, Mia adjusted the live feed axe with shaking hands. Gabriel stood beside Olivia, reviewing the final authentication packet. James spoke into an earpiece, eyes moving constantly between camera feeds. East entrance clear, he said. Service corridor covered. Press credentials are being rechecked manually. If Victor wants chaos, he'll need help from inside. Olivia gave him a look. He exhaled, yes. I know that doesn't narrow it down enough. Gabriel closed the folder and handed it to her. Once, this is public. There is no returning to the old shape of your life. Olivia accepted the folder. The old shape was built around a lie. He smiled, sadly. This time, then, the mention of her father did not break her. It steadied her. A staffer knocked once and opened the door. M's heart 5 minutes. James came to her. He did not kiss her. There were too many eyes, too much at stake, and perhaps the tenderness between them had become too real to be used as a farewell. Instead, he touched 2 fingers lightly to the inside of her wrist, where her pulse beat fast and alive. "With you," he said. Olivia covered his fingers with her own. Alive. His mouth curved, barely. Then Gabriel's phone rang. At first, Olivia thought it was another legal confirmation, another delay, another procedural threat from Victor's side. Gabriel answered with the calm of a man who had spent decades negotiating with wolves. But his expression changed, not with fear. The door burst open. Before he could speak, 4 federal officers entered, accompanied by Aegis Internal Security wearing Victor's authorization badges. The lead officer displayed a warrant, so quickly it seemed designed not to be read. "Gabriel Reed, you are under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of a federal inquiry, and conspiracy to manipulate classified corporate defense records." Olivia stepped forward. "This is absurd. Those charges were fabricated within the last hour." The officer did not look at her mum. "Step back." James moved, not aggressively, but enough that every armed man in the room noticed. Gabriel raised a hand. "Don't, this is what they want." Mia's laptop chimed once, then again. Her face drained of color as she stared at the screen. Olivia. The live authentication window flickered. The mirrored backup held. The packet remained. But the original evidence server, the one tied directly to the Black Lantern archive, the one Gabriel had been using to establish chain of custody beyond dispute, concepts into black, connection lost. Then a second message appeared. Source unavailable. Olivia looked from Gabriel's wrists being forced into cuffs to the dead server on Mia's screen, and the room seemed to narrow around a single, brutal truth. Minutes before she was supposed to face the world, Victor had taken the man who could validate her father's testimony and buried the original evidence in darkness. For one breath, Olivia heard nothing. Not the shouting outside the conference hall. Not the boots of the officers taking Gabriel away. Not the frantic tapping of Maya's fingers. As she fought against a vanished server, the world had been reduced to the black screen reflecting her own face, pale, composed by habit, and violently afraid underneath. Then James touched her wrist. It was barely a touch, 2 fingers against her pulse, steady as a handrail in a storm. "They want you looking at the door they closed," he said quietly. "Look for the one they forgot." Olivia turned to him. His expression was grim, but not defeated. There was blood drying near his temple from the chaos of the previous night. His suit jacket did not quite hide the stiffness in his shoulder. He looked nothing like the polished men who had occupied her family's boardrooms all her life. He looked like a man who had survived too much to believe the first silence was the final one. Mia froze. Then, slowly, her eyes shifted from the dead authentication window to James. "The dead drop," she whispered. Olivia did not understand immediately. James did not explain. He simply looked at Mia and nodded once. Mia's fingers moved again, faster now, not with the panic of a person trying to recover what was lost, but with the precision of someone opening a door that had never been on the blueprint. Olivia remembered James in the safe room 2 nights ago, sleeves rolled up, quietly asking Maya for an isolated terminal, an old router, and no questions. At the time, Olivia had thought he was being paranoid. She had hated how often his paranoia turned out to be love in a different language. "They're starting," one of Olivia's remaining legal aides said from the hall, his voice breaking. "Victor is on stage." On the wall monitor, the press conference feed came alive. Victor Hart stood beneath the silver emblem of Aegis Horizon, wearing a dark suit and the solemn face of a grieving relative. Beside him, Eleanor Hart sat like a queen at a funeral she had arranged herself. The room was full beyond capacity. Cameras lined the aisles. Reporters raised phones, microphones, expectations. The public had gathered to watch a billionaire woman fall, and Victor, with his handsome sorrow and inherited name, was ready to guide them through it. My cousin Olivia has carried an unimaginable burden, Victor began, voice warm, regretful, perfect. In recent weeks, her judgment has been compromised by grief, exhaustion, and the influence of individuals with violent histories and personal vendettas against this company. James's jaw tightened. Olivia stood very still. A photograph appeared on the screen behind Victor. James leaving a military hearing years ago, eyes hollow, mouth hard. The image cropped so he looked like a weapon without a cause. Victor continued. Mr. James Walker is a former Special Forces operative discharged after a classified incident. He has manipulated Olivia's trust, exploited her unresolved feelings regarding her father's death, and encouraged her to misinterpret sensitive corporate materials. A murmur went through the press room. Olivia felt the old machinery of her world moving against her. Wealth did not always need to shout. Sometimes it only needed to arrange the lighting, choose the photograph, give sorrow a tailored suit, and let the poor man become dangerous in everyone else's imagination. Eleanor leaned toward her microphone. "We love Olivia," she said, and the lie came wrapped in silk. But love also means stopping her before she destroys herself, this company, and the thousands of families who depend on us. Something in Olivia went cold. Not the lifeless cold she had worn for years after her father died. Not the sterile calm that had made people call her untouchable. This was sharper, clearer, a winter river under thin ice. Mia looked up from the terminal. "James, I'm inside the relay. Use channel 6. James said. "It's ancient, that's why they won't watch it." Mia gave a breathless, disbelieving laugh that almost became a sob. "You built a military ghost route under a corporate broadcast." "I didn't build it," he said. "I remembered one." Olivia looked at him then, really looked. All this time she had thought he survived by guarding exits. But James had also guarded possibilities, a backup hidden beneath humiliation. A path laid in silence because he had never expected the world to be fair. On the monitor, Victor's voice deepened, effective immediately, with the support of senior family stakeholders and emergency legal counsel. "We are petitioning to suspend Olivia Hart from executive authority pending psychiatry evaluation and criminal review." The room erupted. Olivia's own press conference had been stolen. Her company, her father's name, her sanity, and the man she loved were being placed on trial before she ever reached the podium. A security officer at the door turned to her awkwardly. "Mia's Hart, if you go out there now, they'll cut your microphone." Mia swallowed, tears shining but not falling. "Not if we take the whole room." The lights in the hallway flickered. On the live feed, Victor paused. Something changed behind him. The corporate blue backdrop glitched once, then twice. His careful expression faltered. The emblem of Aegis Horizon vanished. In its place appeared Richard Hart, Olivia's father, older than she remembered in the official portraits, thinner, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. The recording was grainy, time-stamped, archived in a system that had supposedly died minutes before. The press room went silent. Olivia's breath caught so sharply it hurt. Her father looked directly into the camera. "If this testimony is being released, then I have failed to stop Black Lantern through lawful channels. My name may already have been used to authorize actions I opposed. I state clearly. I did not approve civilian surveillance deployment, battlefield data manipulation, or the diversion of defense funds through Hart family shell entities." Victor turned toward the screen. "Cut it." No one moved quickly enough. Richard Hart continued, voice rough but steady. "Eleanor Hart and Victor Hart have conspired with external contractors to revive Black Lantern for private profit. If I am harmed, examine payment trails under Meridian Glass, North Star Relief, and the Daniel Pricefield intercept." James closed his eyes at Daniel's name. Olivia stepped toward the hall. No one stopped her this time. She walked into the conference room, while her father's testimony played above Victor's head like judgment returning from the grave. Cameras swung toward her. Reporters began shouting, but the broadcast had already been captured by Mia's delay. Every screen in the building, every external feed, every mirrored outlet carried the same evidence now. Mia's backup unfolded with merciless clarity. Bank transfers appeared next, not as abstract figures, but as roads of greed. Money routed through charities, shell firms, consulting fees, offshore retainers. Then came altered footage logs from the ambush that killed Daniel Price. Crimes overwritten, drone angles removed, audio channels stripped. Beside each alteration sat a user key, Eleanor Hart, Victor Hart. A sound rose in the room, not quite outrage yet, but the first cracking of belief. This is fabricated. This is illegal tampering by a compromised executive and a mentally unstable soldier. Olivia reached the center aisle. She did not shout. She had spent too many years learning that power often lowered its voice when it finally became real. "No," she said. "This is the part of our family legacy you buried under flags, charity dinners, and my father's coffin." Victor's face twisted for half a second before he recovered. "Olivia, you're unwell." She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, his pity did not touch her. "I was unwell when I believed family meant silence," she said. "I am better now." Then Mia released the final file. Daniel Price appeared on screen. James stopped walking. The recording was dark, shaky, taken in the desperate half-light of a damaged field device. Daniel's face was streaked with dirt and blood. He looked young, too young, younger than the guilt James had carried for him. "If Walker finds this," Daniel rasped, "tell him it wasn't bad intel from command. We were fed wrong coordinates. Black Lantern tagged the convoy before we moved. Hart didn't sign it. The older woman and the cousin. They needed the test buried." He coughed, breath tearing. "James, don't let them turn you into the weapon they made of us. Live long enough to tell the truth." James whistled, not loudly, not dramatically. Something simply collapsed behind his eyes, an old wall finally losing its reason to stand. Olivia reached for him, but before her fingers found his sleeve, Eleanor rose from her chair. She did not scream, she did not deny. Her face had gone hard with aristocratic disgust, as if the room itself had become beneath her. Two private guards moved subtly toward the side exit. "She's leaving," Mia said into Olivia's earpiece. Federal agents near the rear, no longer certain whom they were meant to obey, turned too late. Reporters surged. Cameras pivoted. Eleanor slipped behind the curtain with the cold instinct of someone who had escaped consequences all her life. Victor saw it all unraveling, and in that instant, the mask left him completely. His eyes moved, not to Olivia, not to James, not to Eleanor, toward the second-tier lighting balcony. James saw the glance. His body reacted before thought could form. Olivia noticed only fragments. James's hand closing around her arm. The violent shove that turned her away from the podium. The sharp metallic flash high above the press risers. A sound split the room. Not thunder, a gunshot. James stepped in front of her. His body jerked once. For one impossible second, he remained standing. His eyes were on her, almost apologetic, as if he had broken a promise by being hurt where she could see it. Then the room exploded. People screamed. Cameras dropped and kept broadcasting from the floor. Security surged toward the balcony. An agent tackled Victor as he shouted something Olivia could not understand. The hidden shooter was dragged from the lighting rig, weapon clattering down metal steps. Eleanor, trapped near the exit by federal officers, turned back and saw the blood spreading across James's shirt. For the first time, fear touched her face, not remorse. Fear the whole world saw it. Olivia caught James before he hit the floor. Or maybe she fell with him. She never knew. Her knees struck marble. His weight came into her arms, too heavy and too real, the warmth of his blood seeping through her fingers. "James," she said. Her voice was small at first. Then it tore out of her, raw enough to silence even the panic around them. "James." He blinked slowly, His hand searched, found hers, pressing against the wound, and covered it weakly. Even now, even bleeding, he tried to help her hold him together. "Stay with me," she ordered, though the words were shaking. "Do you hear me? You don't get to do this. Not after teaching me how to live without armor. Not after making me love you." She mouthed closer, tears falling onto his cheek. Around them, Victor was forced to the ground in full view of the cameras, his perfect suit twisted under agents' hands. Eleanor was being restrained at the exit. Reporters were crying into live microphones. Mia stood near the control booth, with both hands over her mouth, the evidence still streaming behind her. Gabriel, brought back in by officers who now looked ashamed, stopped at the edge of the chaos, his cuffed hands trembling. The battlefield had reversed, the truth had won. But Olivia felt no victory, only the fragile pulse beneath her palm. James looked at her with the last of his strength, and somehow, impossibly, there was tenderness in his pain, the same tenderness with which he had once placed cheap coffee on her desk, without comment. The same tenderness with which he had stood between her and every polished cruelty her world called necessary. "Olivia," he breathed. "I'm here." His fingers tightened faintly around hers. "Don't become cold again." The words entered her like a command and a prayer. She bent over him, holding him as sirens grew louder and the lights of the conference hall blurred into white. Somewhere above them, her father's testimony had ended. Daniel's message had ended. Victor's lies had ended. But James's blood was warm on her hands, and Olivia Hart, who had once believed power meant never breaking where others could see, held the man she loved in front of the entire world, and wept his name as if love itself could keep him alive.